It was now the turn of the aged fairy. Shaking her head, in token of spite rather than of infirmity, she declared that the princess should prick her hand with a spindle and die of it. A shudder ran through the company at this terrible gift. All eyes were filled with tears. But at this moment, the young fairy stepped forth from behind the tapestry.
Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Hello again, and welcome back to the series. I'm your host, and today we're looking at Disney Animation's Sleeping Beauty 1959, the third in their trilogy of fairy tale princess films produced under Walt himself. This script was written by Geneviève.
I do, however, have a head. It's attached to my body, it is me.
So thank you, Geneviève.
It'll still be me.
If you're new here, welcome for the first time of, I hope, many, and if you're returning, I thank you once again for your continued patronage. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into this together. This was it, the big one, Walt's grandest design, his most spectacular vision of all time, his final original dream. Mr. Disney's statement to the world that his movies were not merely fantastical cartoons, not merely colorful children's fare, but truly high art, to be taken as seriously as any other film. Specifically with Sleeping Beauty, he was looking to channel the art house brilliance of a visionary such as Ingmar Bergman. He wanted that level of artistic integrity, ambition, and passion, channeled into a gorgeously rendered, high medieval, gothic, romantic, dark comedy fairy tale animation.
It's always a challenge bringing a great story classic to the screen, giving visual form to characters and places that have only existed in the imagination. But it's the kind of challenge we enjoy.
This film is very much the pinnacle of everything that had come before it from Disney Animation, and Walt very much saw it that way too. Walt considered this film an essential part of his legacy. The big, bold, entirely artistically driven fairy tale film that he'd been destined to make his whole life, ever since he first started drawing and telling stories. This was the ultra-fine lightning that Walt had been chasing ever since 1937, with the initial smash hit and critical adoration success of Snow White. With Princess Film number 3, he would make his greatest of masterpieces. In 1937, he had originated the formula. In 1950, he had refined it. And now, in 1959, he was going to perfect it. The rest of the Disney staff felt this way too, with many of those who worked on it feeling that this was the greatest project they were ever involved in. The idea for this film started all the way back in Walt's childhood, as so many of these early films did, alongside other early inspirations under Walt like Cinderella, Snow White, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, The Wind in the Willows, and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, as well as a few more. Sleeping Beauty was a story that Walt first became familiar with as a young boy growing up in Marceline and then Kansas City. He had first considered making the movie starting all the way back in 1938, around the time he was trying to come up with a fitting follow-up for Snow White. And at the same time, he was seriously mulling over early versions of Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan as well. Artist Joe Grant had even submitted preliminary concept art for this late 1930s version of Sleeping Beauty, but all of this was ultimately scrapped along with most of the rest of these early versions of eventual 1950s products once Disney Animation was drafted into helping the US government's efforts in World War II. After having fulfilled their obligation to produce propaganda,
Ja, das Naziland is good. We would leave it if we could.
Disney Animation was free in the late 1940s and early 50s to once again start making money for themselves and telling stories fully for themselves. And with the smash hit success critically and financially of the release of the similarly fairy tale based Cinderella coming at the start of the new decade, Walt finally felt comfortable to put the plans for his third classic princess tale into motion once more. This time, however, was different. This time, he would spare no expense.
Really spectacular, spared no expense.
Oh, it's that guy. It's Spared No Expense Man?
It's Spared No Expense Man. It's Richard Attenborough.
In 1950, inspired by Cinderella's release, Walt drafted a small team of animators and storymen to start adapting Charles Perrault's 1697 published fairy tale La Belle au Bois Dormant, or in English, Sleeping Beauty, into a Disney animation-style feature film script. Inspiration was to be taken as well from the Brothers Grimm version of the tale, in German Dornröschen. This time, the work continued steadily until June of 1952, when a full storyboard presentation was held for Walt. However, upon seeing their work, Walt felt that it was still far too similar to aspects of both their versions of Cinderella and Snow White. He was afraid of repeating himself, or to be seen as falling back on earlier successes to pander, and so he had the team set about reworking the whole thing again. Walt was determined to push the boundaries of what was possible with animation, similar to what he and his staff felt like they'd achieved with both Fantasia and Pinocchio in 1940. With his adaptation of Sleeping Beauty, Walt wanted to combine the fairy tale magic of his first two princess films with the action and adventure feeling of a Pinocchio, as well as the art house ambition and budget of a Fantasia. Sleeping Beauty was to be all three at once, a towering achievement of artistic integrity, effort, and skill. Ollie Johnston would later recall of these early days.
Yeah, I think it was at least as early as 52. We thought it was real great. It had some little gnomes type fairies. It was a whole different type of picture.
Even though it was to be reworked, even in this early artwork, we can see some things that stayed through to the final version, such as the coloring of the three good fairies. While Walt liked a lot of the story elements of this early version, such as there being 4 fairies, 3 good and 1 evil, a prince and a princess falling in love before she falls asleep and then being awoken with a kiss, and the prince defeating the villainous evil fairy in the climax, he was far less convinced by the concept artwork he had been presented with. Disney later recalled, "We had a lot of problems. We were fighting to break away from what we had done in the past. Sleeping Beauty was tough because it had many of the elements we had already used in Snow White and Cinderella. You've got to give the creators new things to work with, so they'll be able to keep their enthusiasm up. You're in trouble if they start saying, 'Haven't we done this before?' We had to find out what we had and whether it would please the public. I'm never sure myself what they're going to buy." However, Walt eventually knew exactly who he needed to assign to get his distinct new style. To reimagine and modernize the concept art for Sleeping Beauty, Walt turned to an ambitious young artist that he had hired just recently in 1951. A young artist that had first applied to work at Disney all the way back in the late 1930s. Walt Disney looked at these early concepts, thought about it, and said, "Let's see what Eyvind can do." Eyvind Earle was a young artist from New York that Disney had hired the previous year. Eyvind was a prodigy that had held his first solo professional art show in Paris at the age of 14. A childhood bout of polio had left his face partially paralyzed, and he had taken up painting as a form of expression at 10, which then helped him through the divorce of his parents very shortly afterward. Eyvind had just gained attention at the company for his experimental background painting in the Goofy short, For Whom the Bulls Toil. Walt's decision to try out the promising eye of Earle on the concept art was an inspired one, as he was able to provide just the young, fresh, unburdened artistic voice that Disney had so desperately needed on the project.
What can be, unburdened by what has been.
And he delivered exactly what the old man had been searching for.
I came to work for Disney's in 1951, more than 10 years after I first tried to get into the studio. Of course, it was the greatest job in the whole world for me, and I remember Walt saying, "Let's see what Ivan can do."
As well as the reimagined concepts, Earle was eventually responsible for the vast bulk of the styling, colors, and backgrounds for the entire film. He was enormously influenced by Gothic and tapestry artwork of the pre-Renaissance era in Europe, seeking to make Sleeping Beauty as close to a medieval illumination come to life as possible. He was even specifically inspired by the naturalistic work of Persian painters from the period, and how they had captured foliage and other plant life in such fine detail. At long last, Sleeping Beauty had found its visual identity within the visionary eye of its young artistic mastermind. Now back to that story. Alright, before we move on, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about the different fairy tale versions of this tale, just a couple of different ones, that the Disney story men took inspiration from when writing the script for this film and its many, many versions. As I said earlier, they were primarily influenced by the Charles Perrault version of the story, but they were also somewhat influenced by, of course, the Brothers Grimm version as well. So this French and then this German version of it. I think that there's an Italian version that's much more screwed up. I believe that there is a version that, if I'm not mistaken, if I haven't heard incorrectly, has some R word happening in it at some point later in the plot, the prince or something. But if I'm wrong about that, I'm going to look that up and see. And if it's true, then I'll leave this part in the video.
You're correct, sir.
You know, they can't refuse because of the implication.
I just tonight read and listened to, alternatively, the Perrault and then Brothers Grimm versions of this tale, and so those are the two I'll be discussing, and neither of those has that in them, so...
Well, anyway.
Yes, anyway, let's take a look. So the Perrault tale basically starts out exactly the same as this film. The king and queen are getting older, it seems, and they aren't able to have a baby. They have wanted a baby for a very long time, and then suddenly they are blessed with a beautiful baby girl, and so they invite all of the people far and wide and all of the fairies to come and see the baby girl, and then the fairies to bless her, basically, with their gifts. In the Perrault tale, there are 8 fairies, I believe in all. There's 7 good fairies and an 8th old fairy that is the inspiration for Maleficent, the aged fairy in the quote from the beginning of this video. And so the Disney storymen made the decision to cut it down to just 3, down from 7, as well as, of course, the aged fairy that they turn into Maleficent, and she isn't exactly aged at all. In fact, she might be the youngest presenting of all 4 of the fairies, except for maybe Merryweather, but it's debatable. So in this version there are that many fairies, and so the fairies give the girl lots of different gifts. So in this version the princess gets lots and lots of gifts beyond that. And so the whole thing happens where the fairy comes and she's pissed off about not being invited, and of course she gives a gift of a curse of dying when she pricks her finger on the spindle. But the last youngest fairy that hadn't given her gift yet hides behind a tapestry because she thought that the old fairy might do something, might pull something like this basically, and so she hides back there and then comes out, as in the quote from the beginning, and mitigates this curse, and then we have the whole thing. And so in both of the tales, the Perrault and the Grimm version, the biggest departure that Disney took was that they did not have the sleep last for 100 years. They had the sleep happen, but they had it last for mere hours, if not less. So in both the Perrault and Grimm versions that I read, the sleep does indeed last for 100 years, and everyone in the castle, including the king and queen, her parents, are put to sleep with her on her around the age that she is. So in both versions, Aurora grows up, or the princess grows up, whatever she's called in the version Aurora or Briar Rose or whichever version you're reading. She grows up and she's running around the castle, and she goes up to this tall tower and she finds this old woman who did not hear the edict that the king gave out about not using spindles to spin anymore, and so this old woman is still doing this outdated thing even after the king has smashed all the other spindles in the kingdom. And Aurora says, "Ooh, what's that?" And she says, "I'm spinning." And she says, "That looks fun, I want to try." And then she reaches out to grab it and she pricks her finger and But in the tale, Aurora is actually kind of characterized as a bit impulsive and very sort of excited about things and a little bit giddy, and so that's kind of how she enacts her own prophecy, whereas in the Disney film, she's characterized as much more serene and calm and having to be entranced in order to get her to prick her finger, and so she's portrayed as much more sort of overtly powerful and serene in the Disney film, and I quite like that adaptational change. However, when she does wake up in both tales, she is described as being extremely sort of charming and full of charisma, and also very calm and collected. So in that way, when she wakes up, she is very much like the film Aurora, so they kept that part of the character very consistent. In the Perrault version, it's explained that the young fairy also made it so that she had pleasant dreams for the 100 years that she was asleep. So in both of the versions, there is a enchanted hedge that parts for the prince as he walks up, because the 100 years have passed. The interesting thing about the Perrault version is that it's kind of 2 fairy tales in one. There is the tale up until the prince finds the princess and awakens her. And in fact, in the Perrault, I don't believe that there was a true love's kiss. I believe that in the Perrault, he simply falls down onto his knees at the moment that she wakes up after the 100 years, and he's suddenly surprised by her waking up, and she looks down at him and greets him, and that's how they meet. So that's it in the Perrault tale. And so there's the one tale of the tale with the sleep and the curse leading up until the prince and princess meet, and then there's the tale after, which is where we get into the whole prince's backstory, and there's 2 years where he dates her back and forth, and they're married in secret, and they have these kids, and his parents don't know because they're meddling, and they're in the kingdom over a couple of kingdoms away, and his parents have no idea that they're married, and then his father dies and he becomes king, and so he brings his bride back to his kingdom to live, and their 2 children that have been called Dawn and Day. And we learn that the prince who is now the king, her husband, Aurora's prince, was actually half ogre, because his mother, who is still alive, who is the queen mother, is full ogre, and she's an ogre who was rich, that his father married for her fortune.
Why don't you just pull some of that ogre stuff on him, throttle him, lay siege to his fortress, grind his bones to make you bread, the whole ogre trip.
And so the prince in this tale is either a quarter at least or fully half ogre from his mother, and it's just so interesting. And she always wants to eat children, and eventually she tries to eat her grandchildren and then her daughter-in-law, and it's just bizarre. It's such a strange tale. So there's this entire other fairy tale after Aurora wakes up in the Perot that Disney just cuts out completely, and then the Queen Mother, ogre woman, is about to kill all of them in the end, and then the king, her son, rides up and she throws herself into this vat of snakes and serpents and everything. It's a crazy tale. It's absolutely wild. What a crazy story the Perot version is. So I'm pretty happy that Disney cut out a lot of the dark second half of that, because it really does work better the way that they wrote this. But you see sort of where they picked and chose things to include. And then to briefly touch upon the Grimm version, there were also elements they took from them, although there's a few things they didn't include. Like, there's a frog that just hops up by the queen one day, Aurora's mother, and says, "You're going to have a baby." And she's like, "Whoa!" And so a frog foretold the Princess Aurora.
Kissing would be nice, yes?
But yeah, frog tells the queen that she gonna be pregnant. And then another difference is that there are actually 13 fairies in the Grimm, which is just really overload. And they're not called fairies, they're the wise women, so...
I seek information about a wise woman.
The wise woman. The wise woman.
Yes, the wise woman.
Yes, they are wise women. There are 12 wise women, and then there is a 13th wise woman that was not invited. So the difference in the two tales in terms of the invitation of the last fairy / wise woman is that in the Perot version, she just hadn't been seen for 50 years. She had been in her tower for 50 years and nobody had seen her, so nobody thought to invite her. And so that's very much more like Maleficent, where you can imagine that Maleficent had just been holed up in that lonely mountain for just years and years and years, if not decades, and they were like, Maleficent's never gonna come. Like, never in a million years is she gonna care about this crap. She's got her own crap going on. She's like, we respect her, but never is it gonna happen. Like, I think that was King Stephen's sort of reasoning in the backstory of this 1959 film, and that is in line with the Perot version, where they're just like, she's not gonna care. It's been 50 years, nobody's seen her. She might be dead.
Yeah, I wonder if she's still alive. Absolutely.
But in the Grimm version, they only have 12 golden placements. They only have the 12 placements for the 12 fairies, and so even though they know that there's a 13th, and they think that she might be pissed off, they don't include her anyway and just hope for the best, which is very, very stupid. So they just leave somebody out. And I actually really prefer the Perot version in terms of the motivation to not include the invitation, because it just makes way more sense if they just don't think she'll even care about it at all, the event. And so it just doesn't occur to them to send the courtesy invite. Whereas in this one, they're just like, we don't even have enough chairs. It's fine. It feels so much more callous that way when they invite 12 people. And also the number makes it even worse when you're excluding one person out of 13 versus one person out of 4, I think. Or one person out of 8, as in the Perot. I also just really like the Disney version to cut down on the amount of fairies, and I like that in the Perot version over the Grimm, so there's that. But then, of course, the Grimm version is a little bit more similar in the ending in terms of there being a true love's kiss, definitely, and in terms of the fact that it just ends after she wakes up. The prince and princess are together and they come downstairs and greet her parents, the king and queen, and then they are together and live happily ever after. And so the ending of the Grimm tale is so much more concise and so much closer to the film that we got. So they kind of took the beginning more so of the Perot and the setup and the initial curse scene and motivation, and the ending of the Grimm tales immediately after she wakes up, and also the kiss itself. But of course, in both tales, they have the 100 years to sleep, so Disney cut that out entirely. So they took the beginning of one, the ending of another, put them together, and rewrote the middle, and did the whole 3 fairies. And basically, the biggest addition to this is, I believe, the characters of the 3 fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. That's the thing, is that while these characters do exist in the original, they are nameless, they are a monolith, and the only one we really know anything about is the one that became Merryweather in the eventual film, the one young fairy / young wise woman who stayed behind the tapestry or just waited and hadn't given her gift yet and mitigates the curse. But in the Disney version, we get these 3 characters that are fully fleshed out. They've winnowed the number down to 3, and then they've given each of them extremely distinct personalities, and so this film becomes so much richer for it. And I think that they knew that this needed to be done, that there needed to be more complex characters in this story for it to really sing and for it to really breathe and for it to really be different from especially Snow White, but also Cinderella as well. For there to be this sort of very in-depth character study on all of these different characters of different ages and motivations and with different things that are important to them intrinsically and different concepts and values that they represent and align with personally. And so the way that they made these 3 wonderful old ladies main characters when they were just a group of nameless, faceless fairies in the original tales is just a brilliant stroke of writing genius, and it suits the tale perfectly, and it gives it this wonderful mother-daughter heart. In this case, I think that Disney absolutely improved on the original tales, although the original tales are wonderful as they are, and they are their own thing. I would never take away from those. Fairy tales are completely different things from, 80-minute films, 80-minute Disney animated films from the 50s, but in terms of adaptational success, I would give Disney a pass with absolutely flying colors in terms of Sleeping Beauty, because they really took the heart of the story. They kept the key and important and essential details of the story, I would say. The spindle, the magic sleep, the curse, the princess with gifts, the prince waking her up, the evil fairy slighted at the beginning and giving the curse through spite, and the last fairy softening it with her gift. They kept all of the really important details. So that's how this 1959 adaptation compares to the original 2 fairy tale versions that it is most closely based on. The Disney Storyman had essentially thrown the second half of the original Perrault tale out, replacing it with a confrontation between the prince and the fairy. To help fill in the latter part of the runtime leading up to the confrontation, staff revived a story beat that had been removed from Snow White 1937. In the original Snow White script, the prince was to reappear again before the ending, to be captured by the evil queen, only to then have to free himself before he can kiss Snow White and break the spell. Due to the Disney Animation staff having much more trouble animating realistic men as opposed to women in their earlier days, or so the story goes. Some people speculate that isn't true, but I see no reason why it shouldn't be. But yes, apparently they had more trouble rotoscoping and doing realistic men in the early days, although some people think it was just to reduce the runtime. But either way, due to a number of reasons, this plot point was deemed too time-consuming in 1937 and labeled not important enough to that story overall. However, this was not the case in the 1950s, and so Phillip's imprisonment by and escape from Maleficent, leading up to this film's conclusion, was the ultimate fate of that decades-old idea. A similar thing happened to part of this film's original plot. At first, the idea of the princess being a shut-in was introduced, having her essentially be a poor little rich girl character archetype, shut up within the walls of her castle and knowing she is royalty rather than being sequestered away in the woods without this knowledge, as would eventually end up being her story. This earlier idea of a princess shut away from the outside world in a castle and dreaming of what life could be like out there is similar to what Disney would eventually end up doing with both Rapunzel in Tangled in 2010 as well as Anna in Frozen in 2013. Much more on how Tangled is essentially a soft remake of this film in a later section. In a couple of hours' time. You've seen the runtime. As the story and the art style were both coming into focus after the big meeting of June 1952, the big overhaul, similar to what we saw in the Sweatbox documentary on the Emperor's New Groove, nay Kingdom in the Sun, nay Kingdom of the Sun. But anyway, after this big visual overhaul, Walt turned his attention toward casting. As he had done before with both Snow White and Cinderella, Walt auditioned actresses blindly by only listening to their voices, and even went so far as to say that he would scrap the film entirely if he wasn't able to find the perfect voice to bring Aurora to life. Mary Costa was just 22 years old when she went to a party in 1952 with her boyfriend and future husband Frank, where she heard that Walt Disney was auditioning actresses to play the title character of his third fairy tale princess film. Walt had been searching for almost 3 years at this point, as he'd started listening to potential voices for Aurora as soon as he had put the film back into active production in the beginning of 1950. Soon after hearing about the opportunity at the party, Costa auditioned. And within mere hours of her recording her tape, Walt had called her personally to offer her the role. To play the part of the villain, however, Walt had never had any doubts. As soon as the tone for the character of Maleficent became clear, Walt had only one name in mind. He immediately suggested Eleanor Audley, the wickedly experienced voice actress that had previously supplied such memorable work as Lady Tremaine in Cinderella.
The wickedly talented one and only Adele Dazeem.
Oh, yes, and the tapestries and the draperies.
But I just finished.
Do them again.
It truly speaks to how confident Walt was in Audley's abilities that, loath as he was to be seen as repeating anything too much from his previous two princess films, he was still completely comfortable casting Audley as the villain of one of them for a second time in a row, and trusted her to make the characters sufficiently different. Along this familiar Disney voice cast line of thinking, Walt then chose studio staple Verna Felton, his previous fairy godmother to Cinderella, as the voice of the busybody lead fairy Flora, and Barbara Luddy, who was just then recording her part for Lady in Lady and the Tramp, was to play the irritable Merryweather. Newcomer Barbara Jo Allen was cast to voice the airheaded Fauna, off the strength of her appearances on The Bob Hope Show. Reportedly, Disney animation staff would often compare the character of Fauna to Barbara Jo's character Vera Vague on the show, to the point where the actress they kept talking about was just straight up offered the role. A very early example of fan casting, basically. After having found his Aurora in Mary Costa, Walt then auditioned over 20 men for the role of Prince Phillip, finally settling on the gorgeous baritone voice of Bill Shirley. Bill Shirley then went through another round of auditions, recording demo tracks alongside the already cast Mary Costa just to check if his voice blended with hers well enough for Walt's ears, with him then personally approving the casting of Shirley as well. To further solidify the artistic pedigree of the film, Walt decided that, similar to Fantasia, the score for this version would be Tchaikovsky's Sleeping Beauty ballet, to be adapted by George Bruns, with all but one of the original songs in the picture taking inspiration from its melodies as well. With medieval art influencing the visual style, a classic Tchaikovsky score, a toweringly terrifying actress cast as the villain, and one of the most mesmerizing voices ever cast by Disney in the part of the princess, all the high art elements that Walt had always envisioned commanding were finally at his disposal, all at once.
I have always thought that the Tchaikovsky was the perfect music for Sleeping Beauty. And after talking to Walt Disney many, many times, I knew that he was fascinated with the Sleeping Beauty ballet. I think if these two people, Tchaikovsky and Walt Disney, had met today, they would be great friends because each had such a myriad of colors in their mind in which to create.
Walt decided that, for this most lavish of productions, it would be the first full-length animated feature photographed entirely in Technorama 70, an ultra-widescreen format meant to showcase the gorgeous art even further. This was going to take a while. The actual animation process for the film, now that all of these elements were finally in place, would finally get underway in 1953, and would continue on for longer than any other Disney film had taken up till that point. Frank Armitage, a background artist on the film, would remark years later that a background for a regular Disney film of the time might have taken a day or two to complete, but that on Sleeping Beauty, the sheer size and detail would require anywhere from a week to 10 full days for a single background to be finished.
I've always been influenced by pre-Renaissance, medieval, Gothic, and here's a movie based on that period of time. I first started with the old medieval artists and almost everything that was Gothic. The tapestries were perfect examples of how foregrounds ought to be. The Gothic came from the Persians, and all their little details of grasses and weeds and trees fit perfectly. So I realized I could use anything that was in harmony with what I was striving to accomplish. And over all of that, a little tiny bit of myself came through.
I think in order to appreciate the complexity of the art and the amount of work that was done, you'd have to mount a museum exhibition.
Production had originally been scheduled to complete and have the film released in 1955, a fairly standard 3-year production, but delays began to pile up quickly. Supervising director Wilfred Jackson had recorded the dialogue with the actors and assembled a story reel by July of 1953, with plans to animate a version of the scene where Aurora and Phillip meet again all grown up in the forest. Walt was unimpressed with this version of the scene, however, and ordered the whole sequence to be reworked. That December, Jackson suffered a heart attack, and so the veteran Eric Larson took over as supervising director on the forest sequence and the film overall. As Walt became more and more preoccupied with Disneyland, which would eventually open in 1955, the year this film had been intended to come out, the release of Sleeping Beauty was delayed to 1957, and then 1958, and then finally again until 1959. Later in production, Walt became dissatisfied with Larson's work as well, and replaced him as supervising director in turn, this time with Clyde Geronimi. The many delays and rewrites of sequences and the painstakingly detailed work put into the art direction, paintings, and animation resulted in a visual production that lasted 6 long years, twice as long as initially thought, and a production budget that eventually ballooned to over $6 million, the most expensive animated film ever made at the time. While the entire point of this experiment had been to produce an ultra-high art film for the sake of its own merit, Walt certainly still always wanted and expected his films to do well, both critically and at the box office, especially since that had been the case for both previous princesses. How did Sleeping Beauty do upon release? At the box office, sadly, it tanked pretty hard. With a production budget well over $6 million, the film made only $5.3 back upon initial release, causing a net loss for Disney of over $900,000.
It's over 9,000! What?
This was, needless to say, a massive disappointment to the company overall and to Walt personally, who was forced to make extensive layoffs after the film's failure and lost interest in the animation division largely more and more so after this, until his death 8 years later. With the critics, however, it was another story. While somewhat divisive, the critical reception was overall that of mostly enraptured delight. Many praised the film's art direction, colors, animation, music, scope, ambition, acting, and singing performances, and especially the character of Maleficent. In addition to this critical adoration that only grew in the following years, Sleeping Beauty was re-released in theaters several times throughout the 1960s and beyond, eventually retroactively becoming the second highest lifetime theatrically grossing film of 1959, behind only Ben-Hur. Due to its financial failure upon initial release, Sleeping Beauty was the last hand-inked Disney animated feature film before the studio switched to the much cheaper and faster Xerox process with 101 Dalmatians in 1961, known more casually as xerography, where the animator's initial sketches were used directly in the final animation process. Xerox was partially used in Sleeping Beauty to animate the Forest of Thorns in the final battle scene. In the decades to follow, Sleeping Beauty would become one of the most beloved, iconic, and monumentally influential animated films of all time, with dozens upon dozens of animators in the many generations to come citing this 1959 film as one of their great inspirations to become artists in the first place, including many that would go on to contribute to and help shape the Disney Renaissance, a phenomenon alluded to by the title of the excellent 2009 documentary Waking Sleeping Beauty. The reach and influence of this film was astonishingly vast, felt over and over again, decades after its original release.
Hello again, folks. Very, very, very late in the game editing phase host here, and I just wanted to pop in here for a moment to say that I will be, periodically throughout the rest of this very lengthy review, joined by my good friend Darren once again, who is going to be exploring the film from his point of view as a viewer and lend us his unique thoughts on it. So without further ado, here's the first of his several segments.
Hello again, and welcome back to the channel. Friend of the channel, Darren.
Yes, hello one and all. It is good to be back.
Today with Darren, we are going to be diving into the all-time classic, Sleeping Beauty 1959. You've already clicked on the video. You already know what you're listening to. Anyway, we're going to start with our impressions from our most recent rewatches of this film. Both of us have seen it, I am sure, dozens and dozens of times in our lives. Take us away, Darren.
Yes, yeah, well, first of all, I think there's no better words to start it off with than what you just said about this classic of classics, and that's exactly right. Basically, this is second to only a handful. This is like one of my favorite animated films ever made. I think it also really represents the pinnacle of what Walt Disney was trying to do with the kind of the princess genre of these movies that he was doing, and it feels the most the most grown up out of this one, Cinderella and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I guess I'll just say the first thing that always sticks out to me every single time I see this film is the animation. The Once Upon a Dream sequence is just like, it's so amazing, and it's so again, it sounds like the most grown-up version also of the love songs that they've done, like whether it was like, Someday My Prince Will Come, and then the so This Is Wild from Cinderella. Both of those are very beautiful songs, absolutely, but they still have a degree which is appropriate for those movies. They still have a degree kind of innocence to them, whereas this movie, it's not that it's not still innocent, but it has a little bit more kind of weight to it.
And I ask about your most recent watch, especially on this film, because it's one of those movies where every single time I do re-watch it, and that's pretty often these days because of the work on the channel that I do, and it's one of my favorites, so it's one of the ones I put on the most often in the background while editing, but every time I do re-watch it, I like to now pick a different element to pay attention to, pick a different thing, and it can be quite a small thing sometimes. So I'll pick a certain character to really pay attention to, or just pick a certain voice performance, or even pick out, like, I want to sort of really notice where they use the color blue this time around, or the color red, or something like that. And anytime I pick something specific to focus on in the movie, I always notice something completely new as well. And it's one of those movies that rewards rewatches and rewards honing in your focus and really dialing in on the details and getting lost in the details that the artists just layered in and layered in and layered in over the 6 years it took to animate this, because this was the longest animation process for any film under Walt.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can really tell that because as I was saying, you can tell that
Yeah.
the animators were painstakingly taking their time to make sure that every frame of this movie was pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And like I said, I need to be clear, I'm not saying that the movies they had done before this, especially Cinderella and Snow White, they weren't doing that to some degree, but with Cinderella, for instance, they were coming off of a lot of flop, and so they didn't have as much leeway to be able to do whatever they wanted to do, quote unquote. And for Snow White, it was really the first film of its kind, so they didn't even really know exactly what was possible. Whereas this, not only did they know what was possible, but they also were coming off of hits, and so that led to them really being able to do whatever they wanted, but in an amazing way, not in like a pretentious way. And so, yeah, I agree. Like every single time I see this movie, I always pick up something new in it. And I mean, I think that the last time I saw, one of the things that also stuck out to me was just how for a film that definitely has kind of that like kind of art housey feel, considering that it's a Walt Disney movie, I was surprised at how much and when I say fun it is, I just mean like I was surprised at how much it moves. Like the pacing in this movie is really, really, really sharp and great. And it tells its story in just the correct amount of time. And I just find that so many stories, period, but especially animated movies nowadays, can feel a little bit kind of long in the tooth. And I think that this is an excellent example of where, again, the animators, Walt Disney, everyone in the production company knew exactly the amount of time that it took to tell this this story.
I'll try to keep this section brief, but it's a very important bit of information for me to put out here before we continue with the rest of the review proper. Sleeping Beauty may be the single most misunderstood Disney film ever by the general populace, or at least by the people who talk about it online. Consider this. Sleeping Beauty is the only Disney animated classic in which the goofy, bumbling, comedic relief side characters are, by any metric, also the protagonists of their movie. This film is a mass of contradictions. It is not only Disney's attempt at making an Ingmar Bergman-esque animated art house film, but it is also very similar in structure to a slapstick film from a comedy team like the Marx Brothers.
He's had a change of heart.
A lot of good that'll do him. He's still got the same face.
Besides, we can't. You know our magic doesn't work that way. It can only do good, dear, to bring joy and happiness. Well, that would make me happy.
Think about it. In almost any other Disney film, certainly any other princess film they've ever made, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather would not be so clearly the main characters of the story. They are the older, sillier, bumbling comic relief trio that look after the title character and raise her. And yet they have far more screen time and dialogue and story impact than either Aurora or Prince Phillip. Prince Phillip and Aurora, mind you, are both perfect examples of a prince and princess character done well. However, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather being the main characters of this film is far more comparable to if characters like the Seven Dwarfs, the mice from Cinderella, Sebastian and Flounder, Lumiere and Cogsworth, the Genie and the Carpet, or even Timon and Pumbaa were the lead characters of their films. Expanding further, you could say this film is like Macbeth, but from the perspective of the three witches. And yet, shockingly, it works. This movie somehow is a masterpiece, deep in its bones, right down to the sometimes downright bizarre story structure and character writing that makes it so unique. It is a mainline Disney princess movie that is more similar in structure at points to the Lion King 1.5 than it is to the first Lion King, or say Mulan or Pocahontas. I love this weird little slapstick, art house, nutty, divine, gorgeous mess of a masterwork, the peak of the longest uninterrupted era of animation that was overseen by Walt Disney himself. It is self-aware in a way few movies would become for another 40 to 50 years, being one of the first Disney movies to knowingly poke fun at its own tropes. Indeed, the entire Once Upon a Dream sequence can be read as a slight wink to the audience about how quickly Cinderella, and especially Snow White, fell in love with their princes at first sight. At least it's implied. The prince in Snow White could very well have come and seen Snow White many times before that, we just don't know. Aurora essentially does this too, but not before she protests.
It's just that you're
A stranger?
Mm-hmm.
To which Phillip replies, half-jokingly, that we've met before.
We've met before.
We have?
Well, of course. You said so yourself. Once upon a dream.
It's a clever way to acknowledge both the fact that they did in actuality meet as infant and child at the beginning of the film, but also that this is still technically a use of their by that point famous love at first sight trope. This acknowledgement of their own story structure and brand is incredibly refreshing for a film made as early as 1959, just as refreshing as those sort of acknowledgements are hackneyed in 2025, and shows a writing and animation team at the absolute top of their game. And indeed, it's done so much more subtly than winks similar to it are done in films nowadays.
Nobody knows this, but I can barely see without my glasses. I do this because I'm legally blind.
However, to harp on this earlier point just for a little bit, I will try not to repeat this too many times, but this is one of the big points of the review, and one of the big things that I realized earlier on in my life, and especially realized going over this film again many times over the last couple of years. I've basically very rarely heard people make this very basic observation about the movie, that the three good fairies are the protagonists. Later on, I'll go into more depth on this point in the critics' roundup, but basically, yeah. I saw it in a review, a ranking of all of the princess films a couple of weeks ago that I watched from this very, very good channel that I'll flash up now if I can remember the name of it.
The three fairies are awesome. They are the main characters.
But yeah, she called out the fact that the fairies were the main characters, and she liked that about it. She ranked it 6th, I think, of the princess films, but very few people make this observation, even if they've watched the film, even if they've watched the film recently. Even the actual Disney wiki lists Aurora as the protagonist of Sleeping Beauty, even though she is clearly a side character, or a co-protagonist at best. Even the wonderful Lindsay Ellis, in her fantastic Woke Disney video, refers to Aurora as the lead of the original Sleeping Beauty when talking about the remake of this film.
We actually develop the originally very underdeveloped lead of Aurora in lieu of trying to correct anything in the original. Lead of Aurora.
The fairies are there from the beginning, and in fact, Merryweather is the one to directly insult Maleficent once she turns up, saying, "You weren't wanted," in reference to her being snubbed for an invitation.
You weren't wanted. Not what?
Indeed, the fairy's inclusion on the guest list alongside her own snub is one of the things that seems to piss off Maleficent the most. The fairies are the characters with a pre-existing relationship with the villain of the film. The fairies, then, are the ones to try to initially mitigate Maleficent's curse, and then they're also the ones who come up with the plan to eventually foil it. They're the characters taking direct action that affects the plot and working the entire runtime to outsmart the villain. And they are the characters that the movie essentially follows, narratively, more than any other. They even go through a distinct character arc, which I will go into fully at the end of their dedicated section. They are there throughout the entire narrative, as the middle of the movie is just as concerned with the fairies' preparation for Aurora's birthday celebration as it is with Aurora and Phillip meeting. Their negligence leads to the low point of the plot, with their arguing, both giving the location of their cottage away and then later allowing Aurora to be hypnotized by Maleficent's magic and wander off to touch the spinning wheel. And finally, they are the characters that lead to the defeat of the villain. Mortal Prince Phillip is the one to literally put his life and body on the line, but the good fairies are the ones providing him the magic with which to actually kill Maleficent. And their magic ultimately allows his sword to travel straight and true and pierce the dragon's heart. At the end of the day, the three good fairies are essential to the core of the plot and all its beats in a way that no other characters of their type are to a mainline Disney princess film's plot and structure. One of the only ones that is similar in plot relevance is the genie, and even he doesn't show up until over 35 minutes into Aladdin. The fairies are there from the very start. And again, while Genie is moving the plot along as a device, he's only activated by someone wishing for something. The fairies affect the plot due to their own desires, motives, and magical abilities, with nobody needing to tell them to do a damn thing. While Aurora may be considered the lead of the middle third of the film, as she is grown up and awake and the movie mostly follows her within that half hour, overall the three good fairies are the inarguable protagonists of the story. Now that we have established who the lead characters actually are, no thanks to the Disney Wiki, the rest of the story suddenly starts to make a lot more sense. Aurora and Phillip don't have as much screen time as the other princesses and princes because they aren't meant to be like the others. They're a pair of supporting characters, not outright leads. The only pair of a Disney prince and princess that are both cast in that supportive role. The fairies are the protagonists, and with that reality figured out and accepted, we can appreciate this movie for what it is, rather than complain about what it is not, as many often do. Criticizing a work of art because it isn't what the audience expected it to be is always a very hollow and selfish way to view said work, in my opinion, and this film is no different. This film has received critique for decades because it isn't a typical Disney princess film, because the title princess character spends a fair portion of the movie magically asleep and only has 18 spoken lines of dialogue when she is on screen at all. However, there's no actual rule stating that the princess must also be the lead character of the movie, obviously. Jasmine is notably a supporting character in her film, even though she is a mainline Disney princess. She's a co-lead, but sort of the same level as Aurora, maybe a little more prominent. However, Aurora is fairly unique in how brief her screen time is in her own film. Anyway, Jasmine has Aladdin as the outright lead of her film, and similarly to an even greater degree, Aurora has the fairies. The good fairies being the protagonists of the original is an aspect of the 1959 film that the so-called remake, Maleficent, completely misunderstands and outright ignores. I understand that Maleficent is the new lead and anti-hero, but if we're staying true to the original, surely that should mean that the good fairies should then essentially become our de facto villains. Instead, these three totally key characters are relegated to the role people who aren't as familiar with the original usually assume they used to inhabit, that of inconsequential comic relief side characters who all essentially fill the same role without distinct personalities, more like a hive mind of three.
Ow! Ow! Ow!
I like Maleficent the movie okay, I guess. I think I gave it a 4.5 in my rank of the live-action remakes. But the number one reason it feels jarring next to the original is perhaps not the switcheroo of Maleficent as lead character, but instead the total character assassination of Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. The 1959 film is essentially like if Tangled was mashed up with The Rescuers, as the fairies being the leads ends up being the closest to Bianca and Bernard in terms of types of Disney protagonists, or the three cows in Home on the Range as well, a little bit, or kind of the three leads of the three caballeros. And that makes it all the more utterly enchanting and unique. Give me a narratively experimental film like this any day. Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather being accepted as the leads of this film rather than being unfairly characterized by people retroactively as supporting players, I think would go a long way towards people understanding exactly what this movie truly is, and what makes it so narratively great. For my money, this is the single most, as I said, misunderstood Disney princess film and Disney film overall, and I think it's about time we gave Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather their due as a fantastic trio of Disney protagonists. Aurora being asleep for less than a third of the narrative, mind you, simply ceases to matter when A, she isn't actually even the main character anyway, and B, the three main characters we do have are this charming and fun. Now that we've talked about how our three magical gals are the leads for several minutes, and I apologize for how many times I reiterated it, but it's a common misconception. Let's talk about who exactly each of these characters are. But right before we do that, I want to briefly touch on how I interpret the magic system partially in this movie. In every instance that any of the four fairies casts a more complex spell, they speak it poetically, usually in rhyming couplets, and they explicitly lay out what effect their spell will have, almost as if they are speaking a prophecy into existence, foretelling of a future magic that they are at that moment themselves bringing into being.
I, rabbit, harpstring home. Turn this water into rum.
This is true for all three fairies' gifts and Maleficent's curse. For the creations of the crown, sword, and shield, and even for Maleficent's spell to create the hedge. Other than some smaller instances of non-verbal magic that all four fairies do at certain points, such as manipulating fabric and turning the dress different colors and baking, any larger spell, usually one with a very specific or long-lasting or powerful effect, is performed verbally in the exact same rhyming couplet casting manner. The only other character that manages to do something similar to this in the movie, other than the four fairies, is Aurora herself, when she sings 2 songs in a row about things that will come to pass that same day. I'll get much deeper into why exactly I think Aurora is knowingly performing magic in her own dedicated section, but for now, that is how the magic system works in Sleeping Beauty, as far as I can tell.
Why, it's a very unusual cake, isn't it?
As mentioned in the intro, Verna Felton was chosen to voice Flora. Felton here returns 9 years after her turn in Cinderella, going from a solo fairy godmother in that film to the head of the trio of good fairies. She also pulls double duty here as the voice of Aurora's mother, Queen Leah, as the Queen only has 2 spoken lines. Felton also voiced the Queen of Hearts in 1951's Alice in Wonderland, making her the only voice actor to ever play a sidekick, Cinderella's fairy godmother, a villain, the Queen of Hearts, and a lead hero, Flora, in 3 separate Disney films, and all within the same decade. And she also did the same thing, pulling double duty as a mother and a supporting character when she did the voice of the mean elephant in Dumbo and also the voice of Mrs. Jumbo. So she had quite the similar dual role there as well. Flora is the resident busybody of the group. She's the personification of the phrase self-appointed leader. While she's not so egotistical as to think she's always right, as she does acknowledge Fauna and Merryweather when they make good points, she only fully trusts herself to be in charge, out of the 3 of them. While this is perfectly fine with Fauna, who never has any desire to lead, Merryweather is another story. And this tension over which of the 2 of them is making important decisions for the group provides us with some of the most fun comic relief in Disney history. The dynamic between these 3 characters is stunningly well crafted, and the rivalry between Flora and Merryweather is the best aspect of that trio dynamic. Their fight over what color Rose's gown should be, blue or pink, is some of the silliest and most inventive time the Disney animators have ever had. It's also a perfect way to showcase how their magic is so very different from Maleficent's, especially visually, and in some ways it even reminds me of Merlin's magic duel with Madame Mim, to come only 4 years later. Flora's strength lies in how pragmatic and confident she is, and how in control of her emotions she can be. While she is a self-appointed leader, she is also an effective one, coming up with the perfect plan to keep Aurora safe on the fly. She's pushy, bossy, and thinks too highly of herself, like when she's entirely too confident in her abilities as a seamstress while attempting to make Rose's dress without any magic at all. But she's also kind, loving, thoughtful, clever, wise, and truly deeply good-hearted. Above all, she is damned brave. When Aurora is cursed by Maleficent, she immediately organizes the 3 of them into directly defying the evil fairy and raising Aurora in secret as Briar Rose. Similarly, when the fairies discover that Phillip has been taken by Maleficent to the Forbidden Mountain, she does not hesitate, insisting that they must immediately go and rescue him, that there is no other way. And, well, she's absolutely right. My final note of praise for her pragmatism is her quick thinking in the finale, when in a matter of moments she thinks to and then immediately does enchant Phillip's sword further to fly straight into the dragon's heart. This works a charm, and unlike a lot of other villain deaths in movies, this one feels totally earned, as Maleficent's dragon form doesn't let up her assault at all. And the only reason it does work is that Flora and Phillip in concert are able to do the enchantment and the throw all in pretty much exactly 5 seconds time. To an enormous beast like the dragon, the blink of an eye.
Thou sword of truth, fly swift and sure, that evil die and good endure. Tisp? 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon, of course.
Fauna gives the magical gift of song. Aurora is the first princess who has a notably magical voice, joined later on by at least Ariel and Rapunzel, if not others that I'm forgetting. While this may at first seem like a less consequential power, I will get into why this gift is so important later on. Fauna is the trio's biggest goof, their own personal adorable airhead. She's the ditz, and I am in love with her. Fauna is the Ringo of this group. She's the unselfish, pleasant, steady rock of the trio, the one that keeps things light and keeps the balance in check. She never loses her temper the entire time, even admonishing Merryweather when she speaks unkindly of Maleficent. She instead proposes that they try to reason with the evil fairy. Fauna is too pure for this world. I adore Barbara Jo Allen's performance. It's the perfect blend of sweet and kind, yet totally clueless and naive. That's the thing, though. These three are all silly, and Fauna just happens to be the very silliest. But when the cat is on the table and the cards are out of the bag, they are all still highly skilled, capable, and powerful magic users. Their magic simply must be used for good, but that doesn't make them any less formidable. Fauna herself says it best when she says they can only use it for nice things that bring joy and happiness. Even when she is off in her own world, totally separate from her two friends, she's just as entertaining. I love her attempt at baking Rosa's birthday cake without magic. Fauna literally folding 2 whole intact eggs into the dough is a terrifically painful moment to have to watch for anyone who has ever even stepped foot in a kitchen themselves.
2 eggs, fold in gently. Fold? Oh well. Ta-da.
Fauna has no ego and is the calming presence that allows Flora and Merryweather to peacefully coexist long term. She cast an immensely impressive spell to give Aurora the gift of song, given the voice it resulted in, and I dare say that she may also have given her adopted daughter some of her sunny disposition as well, whether through magic or simply through the maternal role she assumed for the girl. Ultimately, if Maleficent represents all the forces of evil, Fauna is all the way at the other end of the fairy spectrum, truly representing all the forces of good. She doesn't have an angry or hateful bone in her body, and instead reminds me of Olaf the Snowman at times, with her joyful optimism and kind, loving philosophy. Everybody should have a sweet old aunt like Fauna, and everybody should aspire to be more like her themselves.
I'd like to turn her into a fat old hop toad.
Merryweather is the shortest, squirtest, and smortest of the 3 good fairies. I mean smartest, excuse me.
Smart.
Merryweather has got to be one of my favorite animated characters ever. She's by far the quickest thinking and most logical of this trio. The voice performance given by Barbara Luddy consistently makes me laugh every single time I watch this movie. The way she says, "Well, that would make me happy," when talking to Fauna about her desire to turn Maleficent into a fat old hop toad is my favorite moment in the entire film, period, I think.
Well, that would make me happy.
Strong characterization is what comes to my mind over and over when thinking about Merryweather. She has so many contrasts to her and different sides that seem contradictory in theory, but that are in practice perfectly in harmony to create this wonderful, charming little woman. She's quite pointedly ill-tempered, yet sweet and kind at a moment's notice. She's argumentative and not a natural leader, yet she's often the only one perceptive and practical enough to see the way things have to be. She's the pessimist of the three, the realist. When Flora proposes turning Aurora into a flower and Fauna readily agrees, Merryweather is the only one to see the flaw in this plan, that it will work fine until Maleficent sends a frost. She can also, however, at times be the most thoughtless, insisting that they use magic to make Rose's birthday cake and dress. Correct decision, but then getting into a magical pissing match with Flora about the color of the dress, alerting Maleficent to their whereabouts via her raven. Very, very incorrect decision.
It's time for another good idea, bad idea.
Overall, she's just an enormously interesting and layered character, her friendships with the other two fairies as complex and well showcased as any long-standing friendships we see in any other Disney movies. She's the little sister of these three, and that perfectly drawn sibling dynamic, mixed with the fact that they're all slightly older, bickering friends, makes them all three these totally real and really remarkably fun lead characters. I might also add that she's absolutely adorable, being almost perfectly round in her design, so small and short and squashy. And Barbara Luddy's voice has this quality to me that is the exact right side of persistent. Adorable and fun without ever straying into irritating. An absolutely magical little lady. Yes, gosh, Barbara Luddy was the perfect choice. I love Merryweather, always have.
I'm sure it'll work out somehow.
Well, a bonfire won't stop Maleficent.
Of course not. But what will?
The three fairies were originally planned by Walt Disney himself to be homogeneously characterized as a set of three, with essentially one shared group identity, more like Huey, Dewey, and Louie. However, the animators, including, and I'm sure they have somewhat distinct personalities too, but you get what I mean. However, the animators, including, in particular, Ollie Johnston, were able to talk him out of that and give each good fairy a totally distinct personality. And I cannot thank them enough for that. Well, maybe a better comparison is to the alien toys in the Toy Story franchise. Perhaps.
A stranger from the outside.
If the fairies had indeed been one character split into three, I think that this movie would be a lot closer to as boring character and story-wise as some people claim it is. However, giving them their own personalities completely saves us from this terrible alternate timeline. I mentioned a little while ago that I would get into the fairies' collective character arc as the main characters of this film, and now is that time. To begin the story, the three good fairies are forced to raise a baby that wasn't intended to be theirs, at a moment's notice, sacrificing their magic and regular lives for 16 years, to instead love and raise the child as their own, becoming unintentional mothers in the process. Kind of like the dad that doesn't want the cat, but then eventually falls in love with it and spends all his time with it and treats it like a human baby, and then he is its favorite. They all three happily do this, finding enormous joy and purpose in being mothers to Aurora. For the bulk of the film, then, their emotional arc as protagonists is that of learning to finally let their daughter go. She's become an adult, and as they say when they begin to cry about it during their preparations for her birthday, they knew this day would come. The day they'd have to say goodbye to their Briar Rose.
And we won't have any Briar Rose.
Oh, Flora! Now. We all knew this day had to come.
This even ties directly into the plot. Their preoccupation with Rose leaving them is part of what causes them to lose track of Rose herself and allow her to be entranced and forced to prick her finger. Overall, I find these themes of mother-daughter love and learning to let go within that dynamic while still being protective and giving a watchful eye to be a tremendously compelling and heartfelt emotional core to the story, and an incredibly effective arc for these three characters, and it made me realize what uniquely and powerfully maternal main characters Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather are in the Disney canon. I'm adding this next little note in during the writing of my review for the Three Caballeros, and that video is over a year old now, so this note was added in a very long time ago. I'm just now realizing on this rewatch how much Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather are sort of an echo of Panchito Pistoles, Jose Carioca, and Donald Duck. Flora and Panchito are both dressed in red and are the loudest, bossiest, and most confident of their trio, and the tallest. Fauna and Jose are both soft-spoken, kind, well-mannered, and mostly colored in green. Finally, Merryweather and Donald are both short, ill-tempered, quick to anger, and dressed all in blue. I think that another thing that contributes to the Three Good Fairies being kind of forgotten when people are discussing this film, at least casually, even though they are the protagonists of the movie, is that they are a little bit visually not as emphasized as other characters, like Aurora and Maleficent are the two sort of visual icons of this film, the two beautiful designs and the two really standout characters visually, the princess and the villain. But the Three Good Fairies sort of not only fade into the background because their visual designs, while very beautiful, don't pop as much and aren't quite as iconic as those two, so they just don't sort of sell merch basically as much as those two. They aren't as visually easy to slap on just an anything. And little girls aren't going to be wanting to dress as old women as much as a younger princess. And so they're visually a little bit forgotten in terms of their iconography, and also they're tiny, like literally in the film they become small with their magic, and that has allowed Disney to, in their merch for stuff, or in the posters for this movie, or just anything, portray Aurora and Maleficent as visually quite large, and then portray the fairies as their tiny fairy forms just hovering around, meaning that even visually they are de-emphasized in representations of this film, and they just are given the vibe of supporting characters. They're given the vibe and the shrift of supporting characters, even though they are, at the very least, co-protagonists, if not just the protagonists. I'm pretty sure right here on this DVD cover, if you look right here, it's got Aurora and Phillip, and then it's got Dragon Maleficent, and then it's got Phillip again with his horse, and then it's got just teeny tiny here, the Three Good Fairies, just teeny tiny right there, just a little bit. It's just like, come on. They are the leads of the story, and it's just like, just a little bit right here, just a little bit. So Disney does not really do those characters any favors by just making them teeny tiny on everything.
The fairies, which as you kind of, I think, like you had mentioned it to me a number of years ago, but it kind of made me realize that in a way, like, the fairies are kind of almost like the leads of this movie, and I don't know why, like, whenever I watched it growing up or even in my young adult years, I never really saw that. It's not that I didn't recognize they were a big part of the film and that they weren't great, but I kind of realized, like, oh yeah, you know what, they're actually really the main, like, thrust of so much of the narrative here. And as you said, one of the reasons is that it's juxtaposing kind of these three older quote-unquote women with this younger princess, and kind of their relationship to why they want to protect her, why they want to, make the choices they make. And yeah, the performances, the voice performances by the three are just, like, also amazing. I mean, yeah, Mary Costa does hold a special place in my heart, but at the same time, like, Verna Felton and Barbara Luddy and Barbara Jo Allen are, like, really amazing in their voice performances, and each one of them is so distinct. I think that's the other thing, is that there's a lot of times where these characters in today's Disney film kind of blend together to where I could see anyways them becoming almost an amalgamation of each other, whereas in this film, Flora is very, very different than Merryweather, and Merryweather is very, very different than Fauna. And sure, you can say, well, yeah, but they're also drawn different. I've heard people say, one's red and one's blue and one is green, and that's kind of too simple. And I'm like, well, no, it's beautifully simple. I think that's another thing that I would say is that I think people have kind of forgotten that there is a beauty in simplicity. And not that this movie isn't complex in a lot of ways, but I just mean that there's certain things that people like to say, which to me, one of the things is simplicity, that people kind of sneer at now. Like you were mentioning before, people are so negative now because you're not really allowed to enjoy anything. And I would say that I feel like now one of the big things that people don't like to look on kindly is simplicity. Is there's this degree of oh, well, it needs to be almost complex to an absurd degree to where it gets convoluted. And there's definitely not that in Sleeping Beauty here. So.
For an extra bucket of oats? And a few carrots?
As talked about earlier, the twice auditioned Bill Shirley is just terrific as Phillip. Both, of course, singing, but his speaking lines are just delivered so charmingly, and he's just such a classic leading man. He's got such a soft yet confident voice. He's so incredibly warm, and he sort of catches you so off guard as the viewer, just as he does Aurora in the forest, and sort of disarms you and completely gets you on his side with the way that he delivers his performance. And it's even seen in the animation, and he just delivers it with such a chuckle and a wink. And he's so strong and masculine, yet at the same time sort of a little joking and a little bit in on the joke himself, and not taking himself too seriously. And just the way that he talks to his father is absolutely hilarious. I adore it, and I adore Bill Shirley's performance. Bill Shirley knocked it out of the park. I love Phillip's initial introduction as a child. I adore the look on his face when he goes over to the crib and sees the baby Aurora. He scrunches up his face in this weirded out expression. He's about 6, 7, 8 here, and my interpretation of this look is as if to say, I was told there was a girl my age here. This is a baby. Whatever the look means, it's hysterically funny. Phillip is an absolute gift as a character to this film. Unlike the previous two princes in Snow White and Cinderella, officially named Florian and Henry if you didn't know, Phillip is more of a modern man of action, and appears in more than 2 scenes of his film. Those princes, while excellent and they fill their roles well, again, they feel sort of archaic and old-timey and of another age, whereas Phillip is at the very least caught between the two, with some older elements, but much more like modern princes to come as well, much more so than those first 2. Again, also unlike those 2, he's a pretty constant presence throughout. We meet him as a little boy at the christening, we meet him again in the woods as a man when Aurora does, we see him talk to his father, and we see him captured by Maleficent and then team up with the good fairies to defeat her, upon which victory he delivers to Aurora the most picture-perfect true love's kiss in the history of animated cinema. Phillip, with his outgoing personality and action hero ways, is far more similar to modern princes that followed him, especially Eric and Flynn Rider / Eugene Fitzherbert. And a little bit Naveen as well, just with his devil-may-care attitude. I think he's a little bit like Hercules too, especially because he's such an action hero. He's truly the first modern love interest in a Disney princess film, along with Tramp, 4 years earlier becoming as influential to his subsequent princes as Ariel would be to the women that followed her. His scene with his father, King Hubert, is also one of my favorites. As I said a moment ago, their back-and-forth dialogue is adorable. Phillip showcasing how good he is at piercing right through his father's silly bluster and getting him to come around to his son's modern way of thinking. He's also one of the princes to throw down the absolute hardest, smacking the almighty crap out of Dragon Maleficent in the finale. The story beat of the prince being captured by the villain and locked away in a dungeon works far better here than it probably ever would have in Snow White. And, of course, we know that it works better than in Snow White because they used it in the 2025 god-awful remake of Snow White that I will eventually review at some point, and it didn't work there at all. It was terrible. Anyway.
And thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden. Anyway.
And also, Phillip gets to be on the receiving end of one of the most psychologically terrifying moments in all of Disney history, when Maleficent tortures him by describing his future stay of 100 years in her dungeon, whereupon he will go to kiss the princess and then die as she awakes. Like, my Lord, what on earth, woman? Who hurt you? Oh, well, we know King Stefan apparently. Oh, stupid. God. Maleficent's a piece of crap. I hate that movie. Moving on. Perfect segue. Let's talk about the real Maleficent. I know some people like Maleficent. I'm not saying it's terrible. It's an okay-ish movie. I'm just saying I hate how it bastardized the story of the original Sleeping Beauty and how it ruined the characters of Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, and how it took out all the music, and how it... Yeah, I just kind of hate all the creative decisions. It's terrible, and I hate how they changed the accents from transatlantic to English. It's terrible, and I hate it. Okay. But I understand that some people like the movie Maleficent, but I do not like it myself, and I vehemently disagree, and you can hear a mini review of it in the live-action remake rankings that I made like a year ago, I think. I just don't like Maleficent. I get why you do if you do, but that's my view. But on to the real one now.
Listen well, all of you.
Maleficent quickly became one of my top Disney villains of all time upon my big rewatch of all of these films, in preparation for writing all of the D.E.A.Rs and starting the channel and everything. And easily, I think, the best villain without a song. Well, her or Hades from Hercules. Odd that those two both had such big beef with babies. Upon each rewatch, it is even more and more obvious why Maleficent is so beloved by all who watch this film, not just myself. She is terrifying in ways few animated movie bad guys are allowed to be, as her goal is often just to amuse herself by psychologically tormenting her victims, as she does in her scene with Phillip, as I mentioned earlier, which is a rare quality even for Walt's demented brand of storytelling. Eleanor Audley's voice contained a majesty very rarely encountered. There's a reason why she's the only actress ever to voice two mainline Disney villains, to my knowledge. Maleficent following, as I've mentioned, Lady Tremaine in 1950's Cinderella. She was wonderfully icy, stern, and severe as the antagonist of that second Disney princess. She is downright psychotic here as the tormentor of the third. Audley's voice in this role is even more mature, now in her 50s, and yet this only benefits the performance. There is a tiny croak, a little rasp, a dry crackle in the back of Maleficent's voice whenever she speaks.
Royalty, nobility, the gentry, and... how quaint, even the rabble.
Whether it is the cold bite of her harsh words to her minions in her rage, the wicked smile radiating through her insincerely polite opening lines, or her horrifying bellow as she nearly screams at Phillip of all the powers of hell at her disposal before transforming into a giant feckin' lizard.
Now shall you deal with me, O Prince, and all the powers of hell!
Maleficent has endured as much, if not more, due to Audley's legendary vocals as to any other aspect of her existence. Her design, both in form and function, is also a marvel. Her pronounced chin, sardonically pursed lips, elevated cheekbones, sharply downturned nose, luminous eyes, and high, arching eyebrows are all based directly on Audley herself. Her eyebrows in particular are beyond expressive, and the face of Maleficent as the sum of its parts is a perfect translation of the acid tone of Audley's legendary voice. Audley was also one of the main voice actors to provide the visual reference for her character as well, for the animators to draw inspiration from. Her silhouettes are consistently outstanding. Her ram-like horns wending up from her angular head in two smooth and pleasing curves before transitioning directly down into, as mentioned above, cheekbones so sharp that they could probably take and pass the Iowa State Bar with minimal study.
I've got a plan so cunning you could put a tail on it and call it a weasel.
These sharp angles and smooth curves contrasting is the basis for Maleficent's design and line work, and it is a strong basis indeed. Bold is the word to describe Maleficent, be it in design, performance, or characterization. She does not screw about. In almost every ranking of all the Disney movies that I watched prior to this series of reviews, Maleficent is singled out as the standout character, and just in any discourse I've ever heard about the film, and is praised almost as highly and effusively as the music and animation always are. Angelina Jolie is a marvelous actress, often, and gives an okay, at times pretty decent performance, but she is hampered in the remake in 2014 by the neutering of her character's actual wickedness and malice. Audley's original 1959 Maleficent is pure, spiteful evil, petty grudges, and thinly veiled rage. She cursed a baby on the day of its christening to die just to punish its thoughtless parents because she wasn't invited. She obsessively searched for this child for the next 16 years to absolutely ensure her curse worked beyond the shadow of a doubt. She revels in tormenting the captured Prince Phillip, foretelling a future wherein she releases him after 100 years to wake the sleeping, still young princess with true love's kiss before falling down stone dead right after. She finds nothing less than utter joy in her infamy, her amorality, her diabolical disregard for any other living being except her pet raven, Diablo. She's the baddest bitch in the Disney canon by a wide city mile, and she should always be remembered and treated as such. And Jolie's Maleficent is basically none of those things. She's just sort of a lady who gets SA'd, essentially. Kind of the allegory is that she's a lady who has a traumatic experience with the king and loses her wings, and then curses a baby out of anger, and then essentially raises that baby, and and then she's true love's kiss, and it's a completely different story, and it's just not Maleficent. Like, that's not the character. It's different. It's also worth noting that while Jolie does a received pronunciation British accent in the remake, Eleanor Audley's original Maleficent actually spoke with what was at the time the very popular and considered very classy transatlantic accent, often thought of as the particular old-timey accent and inflection with which the 1930s, 40s, and 50s American news anchors, radio announcers, and movie actors talked.
What a glittering assemblage, King Stefan.
Quite a glittering assemblage, King Stefan.
Royalty? Nobility? The gentry?
Royalty? Nobility? The gentry?
I really felt quite distressed at not receiving an invitation.
I really felt quite distressed at not receiving an invitation.
Oh dear. What an awkward situation.
Oh dear, what an awkward situation.
Well, I knew that I was brought up in a big family, and I was brought up great. Just brought up great. I had a fascinating mother, a fascinating father, and a wonderful childhood.
And I agree with you, by the way, not only with what you're saying about how Aurora is a lot more important to the story than people really say or understand, but also I completely agree with you that that it actually makes so much sense that Maleficent would not have a song in this film. Like, it feels like when you think about it, and you go, oh, wait a minute, she didn't have a song. You don't then go, oh, man, why didn't she have a song? You kind of go, no, that makes sense, because as you said, if, like, you know, Mary Costa's singing voice, Aurora's singing voice, is kind of like the magic that makes her who she is, it would stand to reason that the person who's, or not the person, the force that's trying to destroy her would be the opposite of that, meaning that they would be not against music, but they wouldn't have anything to do with like with music and with singing and stuff like that. And so I completely agree. And the other thing I was just going to say, and I think I've mentioned this to you before privately, but I'll just say it here now for everyone, is that I think that there's no question that, at least to me, that Maleficent isn't the most like villainous and pure evil of all the at least the classic Disney villains. I guess I can't say again, I'm not going to go into the Renaissance era yet, but it is just, and I think that's one of the reasons why people love to hate her so much, if that makes sense, because there's again a dare I say a purity, or not a purity, but a pureness to her evilness that is just so great. And that's one of the things, if I can just say this as well, that I'm kind of missing from a lot of villains in Disney movies, but also in a lot of stories today, is that while, of course, it doesn't mean that we don't want our villains to be complex in certain ways, there seems to be now this innate this thing about wanting to basically make villains where we kind of go, oh, well, wait a minute, are they the villain or are they not the villain? And I don't understand why we can't recognize that, no, it's a good thing to know who is the villain and who is the hero. Just because you know who the villain is and who the hero is doesn't mean that you can't still understand maybe their motivations or etc. and like basically go, oh yes, I understand why they're doing that, but still recognize that they're evil, that they're the villain. Whereas nowadays it's kind of gone to the point of not only do you understand their motivations, but it's almost like the creators and the director and the actor are wanting you to question whether they are the villain. And while I'm not saying that that can never be interesting, there is again using this word again, a purity and a simplicity to the fact of when a character comes on screen and you just go, oh, that is the villain of this film, and you never have a moment where you're doubting that. And that obviously, I'll just briefly mention that's one of the things that the live action, quote unquote, Maleficent just got so horribly wrong, is the fact that they fundamentally changed her into like the hero really of the story, and that's why it just baffles me why they decided to do that, because they're literally taking their most cherished, well, not maybe their most cherished, but their most artistically accomplished film with their most accomplished villain in regards to their villainness, and they turned her into like, again, like basically the hero. And that's something that thankfully this original film in Maleficent does not do. Yes, we can acknowledge that Elle Fanning's performance as Aurora, and even Angelina Jolie's performance as the character that she's playing in that film is really good, and the acting and all that is good. But in regards to the legacy of the Aurora and Maleficent characters in 1959 Sleeping Beauty, it is really like kind of crapping on them. And also the stuff surrounding the movie is so bland and just not at all the richness of what this original film is, that again, I still have a special place in my heart for especially Elle Fanning and also Angelina Jolie as the characters they were playing in that film. But other than that, I certainly don't look at that in the same way that I used to, that's for sure.
Maleficent is such a beautiful representation of how spite and envy and anger and pettiness corrupts the soul and ruins the life. And because when you think about it, what happens in the film? Maleficent gets angry, she curses the baby goes to live somewhere else, the king and queen are sad for 16 years, the baby gets to grow up to be a happy young woman with 3 loving mothers, and Maleficent spends 16 years freaking miserable. She ruins her own life for 16 years and then she dies. Maleficent is symbolic of the failures of pettiness and anger.
Yes, no, that's exactly right. I was going to say it reminds me of the, if I can just use an old classic saying, and is the one where it says, it's not bitterness, but it's basically like a version of like bitterness and revenge is like taking a poison yourself and expecting the other person to die. And it's basically saying that when you live your life in, as you said, bitterness, envy, resentment, all those things, it actually, most of the time, doesn't even hurt the person that maybe you want to hurt. It more than anything hurts yourself. And even if it does, whatever, hurt or affect the other person, you're not really able to, quote unquote, enjoy it. I mean, I know that that's not the right word, but I'm saying from the person's perspective, you're not able to enjoy it like you want to, because again, it corrupts and it poisons you. And that's exactly right, as I think that this shows, and it kind of, again, if we can talk about the kind of the way that it mirrors between Maleficent and then the fairies, is that it shows the good version of that, meaning that when you are a woman who's basically come to the world through love and caring and motherhood and sweetness, there is a wonderment and a sense of protection that those fairies have that is just so amazing to see, and it's just so like, oh yes, I want to keep following them, corresponding to then Maleficent, who again, she thinks that she's doing all these things and that it's going to lead to whatever, and you're just watching and you're going like, oh my gosh, like, do you not understand that this is just going to again corrupt and poison you? And again, these are all things that on the one hand, one can look at and go, well, that's pretty, standard and pretty, not ordinary, but pretty standard. And it's like, yeah, but again, there's a beauty and there's a beauty to that it's simple like that. Again, I don't like using that word always, but yeah, that simpleness, there's a beauty to that. And so I think that, I think that that's a perfect representation of really what I think the crux of this movie is of course we have the true love aspects, and we have the princess and the prince, and we have the fairy godmothers in a way. I know they're not actually like really fairy godmothers, but we have all that, which is still great to see. But I think what separates this film from especially Cinderella and Snow White is the fact of, although I guess it shares a little bit of similarity to Snow White in this, is that it kind of showcases what, again, envy and bitterness and resentment can do to a woman, juxtaposed to what, again, kindness, love, motherhood, can do to women, and kind of as they grow up, what happens. Because as you said, while Maleficent, we never see her young, she's obviously younger at the beginning of the film than when Aurora turns 16. And the fact that a younger woman, Maleficent, decides to hang almost 20 years of her life on resentment and bitterness, it's just,
I wonder why each little bird has a someone.
Let's talk for a moment about how the three fairies' gifts all play a part in saving Aurora, as her magical singing voice from Fauna calls Phillip and Samson to her in the forest, and her beautiful face and personality and demeanor from Flora's gift allow Phillip to so completely and instantly fall in love with her at first sight, thereby giving him the needed motivation to defeat the dragon Maleficent in the end. Thusly, Aurora's magical powers of beauty and song each play a key and active role in saving her, whether she was aware of it or not. I do like to think, however, that over the years, Aurora noticed that strange and marvelous things would often happen when she sang to herself, and that she was doing this on purpose. That is to say, that she was singing of a man coming to meet her, genuinely hoping that the right one, magically, might. I mean, this can't be the first time that she's sung to herself in the forest about something that she might like to happen, if she is any sort of a typical Disney princess. And so if she's gone out there and sung about things that she'd like or like to happen, and they've ended up happening or just walking right up to her, then maybe she just knows that she has this reality-bending power. I like to think so. I love this line of thinking, personally, because it not only adds another dimension to Aurora in terms of her not only possessing specific magical abilities, but also knowing about and being able to somewhat knowingly use them. But this also then makes her a far more active part of her own story. Her musical sequences become her actively choosing her fate, choosing to send out a spell in the form of her knowingly magical song.
Samson?
If the things that Aurora has sung about as she's grown up have tended to end up happening, as might follow from having said magically prophetic voice, then Aurora is very much so blatantly choosing to fall in love on that particular day. Her birthday, giving herself a birthday present, basically. Unknowingly then setting in motion a sequence of events that would eventually save her life just a few hours later. So yeah. I do think she was giving herself a man for her birthday. I do think she was giving herself Phillip as a present, and he ended up saving her life, so she chose it. So there you go.
I'm smart, you're dumb. I'm big, you're little. I'm right, you're wrong. And there's nothing you can do about it.
In fact, the lyrics of her first song, I Wonder, essentially totally confirm this theory as the most likely explanation for what is happening in this scene.
Bring back a love song to me, the way you did once upon a dream.
In addition, Phillip says when sitting talking to Samson that there was something strange about that voice, too beautiful to be real, and says that it may have possibly originated from some magical sprite of the forest.
There was something strange about that voice. Too beautiful to be real. Maybe it was some mysterious being, a wood sprite.
This line confirms that there is something fully supernatural in story regarding Aurora's voice, even now as an adult, beyond the childhood gift. I mean, Maleficent and Merryweather's gifts have lasted this long, so why not Flora and Fauna's? Therefore, why shouldn't that supernatural power be the ability to grant wishes to the singer of the song when sung of as a dream wished upon? As well as her beauty perhaps giving her the ability of magical hypnosis or entrancement in some way. I think that overall this is exactly how Aurora's magical voice works, that she wishes for something in this way and then that wish is somehow granted. And at the end of the first act, Aurora has actively made her choice by wishing to have her dream of a man, bringing a love song back to her, finally granted on this, of all fateful days, her much anticipated 16th birthday. This also makes all 5 of the main female characters in this film knowing magic users. How cool is that? I think that that is actually what is happening. I think that that is at least a good chance how they meant this film to be read. I honestly do think that it might just be there in the text and that it's just subtle. So, I think so. I think a lot of people missed that. I missed it for a long time. But I think that Aurora is working magic and I think that she knows it. I must then briefly mention the lyrics of the Beauty and Song gifts, and in particular the wording of the part in Song where it is sung of the nightingale being her troubadour. The nightingale here may represent Aurora's magical song itself, or perhaps the mystical force that grants the wishes that she sings of to come true. Maybe the nightingale is code for her personal wishing star or something like that. Either way, this is the second Disney princess film in a row to have a specific reference to nightingales in song, after the Sing Sweet Nightingale sequence in Cinderella. This film also completes the streak of all three classic Disney princesses singing their first song specifically to birds. Aurora possesses, in my opinion, the greatest voice of any Disney princess. Alongside Adriana Caselotti as Snow White, Aurora is one of at least two, and maybe the only two, to have operatically trained actresses voicing them. As mentioned earlier, Walt Disney had considered scrapping the project, fearing he would never find a voice ethereal enough to suffice for his vision of Aurora, until he heard the angelic tones of Mary Costa. She supplied the almost supernaturally beautiful singing and speaking voice we hear in the final film, recorded painstakingly by Costa over the course of 3 years, from 1952 to 55. Both Eileen Woods and Mary Costa were the first two princess actresses to have actually been little girls when a Disney princess film came out, with them being 8 and 7, respectively, at the time Snow White released in 1937, and with Woods' Cinderella being showcased then in 1950, Mary Costa was the first actress with the benefit of multiple former princesses to go off of and take inspiration from when the time came for crafting her own Disney princess vocal performance. To play Aurora was to now be joining a proud tradition in the making, and Mary certainly went on to create an essential link in that long and nostalgic chain. And long before any thought of a Disney princess brand was ever in anybody's head, still, it was obvious that this was the flagship series of Disney animation films, and that these princess characters were on a slightly elevated level in terms of their place within the company's filmography and iconography. And so, even though there was no official brand yet, everybody knew that when Disney did a princess movie, it was always a big deal. I must note also that Mary Costa has herself, just this year, a couple of months before the recording of this video, turned 95 years old. On April 5th, 2025, I originally had re-recorded this video on that day, on her birthday this year. This is actually the third time I'm recording this script for various reasons that I won't go into right now, but happy birthday retroactively to Mary. And Mary is the oldest and longest surviving Disney princess voice actress, and probably my favorite of all, as you have maybe gathered from the way that I've talked about her so affectionately. But I just adore what she did with this film and this part, and I'm going to put in another clip of her talking about the character right here. But
it just gets us all enveloped in that wonderful melody, and then by the time the picture ends, we have a chorale and a full orchestra under that melody, and there's almost an eternal reverence with it for it's just so compelling. I know that every Disney picture I have seen makes me cry at the end because it's just so profoundly moving. And this was one of those times, particularly in Sleeping Beauty.
I just really appreciate Mary, really appreciate her as a person and everything that she has given all of us throughout our childhoods if we love this movie, and our lives if we love this movie, with her just outstanding, all-time, enduring, everlasting, timelessly classic vocal performance, especially her singing. So, very happy that she is still with us, and I think of her often. Aurora has arguably the greatest visual design for a Disney princess, up there at least with Ariel, Belle, Mulan, Tiana, Rapunzel, and a few others on the short list of princesses with the best cases. However, Aurora has, I think, just a really unique aesthetic and several great outfits. The only true supporting character princess, as I've gone into extensively here, this allows her to be charming in a fashion unlike any other of her kind, alluring in a mysterious, far-off, dreamlike way. She also has not ever had an animated sequel, unlike most of these princesses, and so her mystique is kept intact. That is, if we do not count the vile, disgusting dreck that is 2007's Disney Princess Enchanted Tales Follow Your Dreams, a ghastly little film. Anyway, Aurora is an enchanting, magical presence in this film, a gorgeous supporting heroine, while still primarily being the film's MacGuffin as well. She's the ultimate Disney it girl, enchanted and blessed at birth with the gifts of both beauty and song. She is at once playful and coy, but always still warm and romantic. There's just a coquettishness about her that is so intoxicating and entrancing. The way that she moves her eyes, the way that she subtly gives people little looks, the way that she just communicates with her body language.
Body language!
She's just so subtle and so clever, and she sees and perceives so much around her all the time. You get the feeling that it would be very difficult to get anything past Aurora, that she's very good at sussing a liar out. Especially, you get that sense when she's talking to her 3 fairy aunts, and she sees through them right away. She knows them like the back of her hand, and I love their relationship. She's the dreamer of the Disney princesses, literally and figuratively. I would go so far as to say that she may be the most purely enchanting Disney princess. She's the only one with purple, or specifically violet, eyes. And I really love the fact that she has purple eyes, as purple is what you get when you combine red/pink and blue. Aurora's eyes are literally a combination of the 2 colors that 2 of her fairy aunts keep turning her dress back and forth between the entire movie. This is a wonderful little visual metaphor for her very much being daughter to all 3 of the fairies. Indeed, you could say that she has her mother's eyes. Another couple of notable characters that have violet or purple-colored eyes are Judy Hopps in Zootopia, and actually Yzma in The Emperor's New Groove. And there's probably a couple of other Disney characters with violet eyes that I'm forgetting, but even in just fantasy in general, violet eyes is quite an interesting trope and is kind of a sort of chosen one almost, but like very important main character energy trope kind of thing for characters to have is violet or purple eyes, I've read. I want to put in a note here, speaking of interesting colors and color combinations, that her forest dress, rather than being sort of beige, brown, kind of that it is in real life, along with the black, it was meant to originally be green, as it is in this little golden book, which I have on the desk here. Which is perhaps a similar reference to her eyes, but instead to fauna. You can see there on the cover, it's green there, and in the book, it's the same thing. I'll take pictures for you and edit them into the video, but you can also see right there that it's green, and it was, I think, originally going to be that, because this book is from 1957. This is an original piece of promotional art, essentially, promotional merchandise. This is a 1957 released little golden book that my grandmother bought for my mother when she was about to have her, or when she just had her in 1959. And, it was a couple of years old little golden book, but the little copyright in there says Disney Company 1957. And so this came out 2 years before the film itself, meaning that it has an earlier version of the concept art where Aurora's forest dress is actually colored in green in the cloth bits. And I just think that's fascinating, and I think it would have been kind of cool, but I also love her dress as it is, so I'm not complaining. Anyway, I also just wanted to have a good way to segue into talking about the fact that I have this antique original piece of merch little golden book from 57, and just how freaking cool that is. This is the oldest and most unique piece of Disney merchandise that I own, and my mom gave this to me, my grandmother gave it to her, and it's kind of a family heirloom now, and yeah, it makes me very happy that I still own this. And I'll be putting in pictures of the artwork over me talking about it right now, obviously, but look at how pretty this is. Isn't this gorgeous? I'm very lucky to own this piece. She's also the only princess whose hair is detailed in white rather than black or brown. She owns 2 of the most gorgeous dress designs ever, her forest dress and her birthday gown, and her hair design and movement is second to no princess except, of course, Rapunzel, or maybe Merida, if we're counting her. Aurora's 2 songs, I Wonder and Once Upon a Dream, are both, especially the second, just simply absolutely beautiful, and I'll get more into them in the music section. Suffice to say that Aurora has the benefit of some of the best songs and elements and design choices of any princess, period. I continually see people who, when discussing this movie, claim that Aurora is asleep for half the movie or even most of the movie sometimes, and that she only has 18 spoken lines of dialogue. Let's address that first claim first, that she's asleep for half or most of the movie. Sleeping Beauty is 78 minutes long. Aurora is actually asleep after she's pricked and before she's awoken again by Phillip's kiss for 20 minutes. It's literally exactly 20 minutes of runtime. She pricks her finger on the spinning wheel in the tower at the 51-minute mark, and she is awoken again by Phillip at the 71-minute mark. She's barely asleep for a quarter of the runtime. It's literally just the final act. And her succumbing to the curse is the catalyst for the final act to even happen. So it's essential to this storyline and the entire plot structure. I'm sorry, but I simply don't see how any of this makes her a bad character. And yet, you do see her ranked at the very bottom continually of a lot of people's rankings of the princesses. People just call her very weak. People call her a bad character, a weak character, a bland character, a blank character. And I couldn't disagree more with all of those statements. She is literally only absent for a quarter of the runtime, which is when other characters get to shine. She's only gone for Phillip's capture, the fairies' spell of sleep, their rescue of him, and the final showdown between Maleficent and the 5 heroes present: Flora, Fauna, Merryweather, Phillip, and Phillip's horse Samson, which, as I said, all takes place in a very tight 20-minute time frame from 51 to 71 minutes. For the other 3/4 of the movie, the character of Aurora is awake and actively making the film better for her presence. Surely 3/4 of the film is enough for a supporting character like Aurora to be an active part of the ongoing narrative. Now let's talk about that second point, how she only has 18 spoken lines. Beyond being a ridiculous criticism at face value already, as again she's a side character by design, this is a totally misleading argument as it ignores one of the most core elements of Aurora's character: that voice. While she may only have 18 spoken lines in the movie, there is a full 10 minutes of the film, from 22 to 32 minutes in the runtime, that is devoted exclusively to her singing her 2 songs back to back. While she may have the fewest spoken lines of any Disney princess, she has some of the most singing to do of any of them as well, and the longest single song/musical sequence, if you include the entire I Wonder/Once Upon a Dream section as one continuous whole. Either way, while speaking may be a bit less important to Aurora's character than any other princess, singing and music are far more important to her than almost any other. Combine that core trait of beautiful and ever-present singing with the fact that Mary Costa is indeed one of the most gorgeous voices that Disney has ever managed to cast, and you get a character that has a downright insane level of allure and mystique. Aurora possesses an aura of tranquility, hope, and quiet love, all delivered through a couple of the prettiest songs you'll ever hear. If nothing else, I'd say that 10 straight minutes, mostly filled with astonishing and mesmerizing singing, more than makes up for, once again, a purely supporting character having only a handful of spoken lines. And again, as I say, she communicates so much with her body language and her eyes and her expressions, so, if you need spoken lines for a character to be compelling and have character, then, maybe you're not paying attention to the other parts of the character very much. Film is a visual medium, after all. These are the 2 big criticisms of Aurora, and upon investigation and given proper context, I find them to be disappointingly lazy at absolute best and willfully, embarrassingly ignorant at worst. For anyone caught still parroting them, I just don't jive with those critiques at all. Finally, her actual characterization is one that I grow to appreciate more and more. Aurora, in her slightly brief screen time, is shown to be the ultimate hopeless romantic. She walks barefoot in the forest each day, singing to the animals and all but fully conversing with them musically. She's happy with her 3 aunts and loves her simple life, but like Rapunzel and Belle, also living simple lives, she longs for something more. Rather than for travels or adventures, however, Briar Rose longs for a single perfect love. She wishes for and sings of a romance born within her dreams, a lover at once both imagined and all too real. Aurora is coy, charming, beautiful, and has a wonderfully silly sense of humor. She's highly emotional, but not impetuous. When informed by the fairies that she is a princess and must return with them that night to fulfill her duties, she obeys her three aunts. Although she is devastated to not be allowed to see her young man again, she understands that her duty, at least for the time being, is more important. Although she is a dreamer, she is also mature in this way and respects and honors her three mother figures above all else, trusting them to know best, which then makes her tearful breakdown in front of the mirror in the castle all the more heartbreaking, and is also such a great and beautiful and perfect emotional beat. Her expression of quiet, satisfied joy and love when woken up by Phillip's kiss is utter magic. I don't think there's a prince and princess pair that has more truly enchanting chemistry than do Aurora and Phillip. She just looks so happy and at peace there. It's so nice. As a final note, I also really admire the strength of Aurora, specifically when she is being hypnotized. Despite already being under Maleficent's spell, she still resists at the last moment when hearing Merryweather's voice calling to her, necessitating Maleficent having to overwhelm her with powerfully compelling magical commands. This moment of resistance is impressive, as fairy magic is incredibly potent in this story, and Maleficent is in many ways the most magically powerful fairy we see in a Disney film, except of course maybe the blue fairy from Pinocchio. Making Aurora's resistance here only further serve to highlight her quiet and understated strength. She's just a wonderful character, one of my absolute favorites, maybe my favorite princess.
It's such an honor. I feel so blessed because now I met little children years ago, and now they're grown and have their own children, and they still come back to see me. It's been so wonderful. It truly has. You know, Walt Disney adored this film. I think it was probably his favorite. He loved Tchaikovsky. He loved the Sleeping Beauty Ballet, and we started it in '52. It was not released until '59 because in the middle he created Disneyland. I mean, you know, and he wasn't in any hurry to finish it, and everything that was done he had to approve. Walt Disney called me, and he said, "You have a warm, warm voice, and it expresses love from your heart. Also, your voice is so naturally placed that you can use your singing voice as an extension of speech." And he said, "I want you to drop all of the colors and the things that you feel about Briar Rose to your vocal palette, and I want you to paint with your voice."
The music of this film, along with the animation, are the two technical elements that get praised by essentially everyone, and so I have a lot less work to do explaining their many merits. However, I do think I can still add to the appreciation of them just a little bit in my own original way. Once Upon a Dream is to Disney Animation's stable of songs as Strawberry Fields Forever is to the Beatles. It might not be the absolute first song you think of, but once you listen to it again, you remember why it's one of those quiet, slightly hidden masterpieces. The melody is one of those that transports you instantly in your mind back to its scene of origin, if you so much as hear someone humming it casually. The lyrics, few as they are cleverly rhymed and skillfully looped together in a charmingly repeated theme. Phillip and Aurora's voices are perhaps the most gorgeous pair we ever hear in a Disney film, and this song is one of the few that could be said to truly capture the feeling of Disney animation magic itself. all other songs here are marvelous. Once Upon a Dream, I Wonder, Hail to the Princess Aurora, the Gifts of Beauty and Song, and the title track Sleeping Beauty, as I mentioned in the intro, I believe, are all based on melodies and themes found in the Tchaikovsky ballet. The only entirely original song is Scumps, sung by the two kings in a toast to their children. Scumps is a really fun, brief number with clever little lyrics and put smack dab in the middle of one of the funniest scenes in the film. Some people don't love this, but it really works for me. Kings Stefan and Hubert are discussing the return of Aurora and her subsequent marriage to Prince Phillip. Each time they toast the betrothed couple, they break into song together, ending in a gulp of wine, often King Hubert having his gulp and King Stefan being prevented.
There is a California champagne by Paul Masson.
The servant providing musical accompaniment and stealing drinks in between verses is a perfect comedic touch, and one of my favorite non-verbal Disney characters. And the fight after the song with King Hubert slamming a rigid fish as if it's a massive long sword against a plate shield held desperately in defense by King Stefan is comedy gold. I Wonder is an underrated entry in the Disney Princess Solos songbook. It's almost a precursor to the I Want songs found in later Disney movies, such as Part of Your World, the reprise of Belle's song, or Out There. It's a gorgeous showcase of Costa's vocal range, her tone, and her incredible control. This is a voice at once trained within an inch of its life, but also bursting with character and personality. Costa here both singing and speaking in the 10 minutes that I Wonder and Once Upon a Dream take up is the star of maybe the single most enchanting sequence centered around any Disney princess, although there are many other contenders, but this is up there. There's just something so effortlessly ethereal and purely aesthetically pleasing about Aurora in these scenes, especially in how mysterious she is, yet how relatable she manages to be through Costa's yearning and earnest performance. By the end of those 10 minutes, we are in love with her as much as Phillip is. The lyrics of the song not only foreshadow her meeting Prince Phillip, as I have already discussed, but to add on to that, visually, Aurora ends this first song by gazing longingly at the castle in the distance, the castle in which she has yet no idea resides her own mother and father, whom she will finally meet again the next day. Simple, elegant little poetic touches like this are what makes this film so special. The other three numbers, Hail to the Princess, The Gifts, and Sleeping Beauty, are all sung by an off-screen choir, all almost angelically, and the fact that this occurs throughout the film gives it all a supernatural and dreamy quality, befitting of the story. The Gifts of Beauty and Song is particularly interesting. This is the music accompanying flora and fauna bestowing their magic upon Aurora, ensuring she will have effortless natural beauty and music throughout her life. Merryweather's original gift is interrupted, but it was revealed later on by the writers that her gift would have been the gift of happiness. In Maleficent, they use this original gift to skirt around the fact that Elle Fanning isn't a singer and that they axed all of Aurora's songs in this so-called remake by having the first two fairies bestow her with beauty and happiness, this time leaving song out, making animated Aurora and live-action Aurora distinctly different characters in this way, with different gifts and correspondingly different magical powers. As disrespectful to the original film as this is, it's probably for the best, as absolutely nobody could follow Mary Costa's voice. And basically, that actually kind of gives me a really good theory as to why the plot of Maleficent is different in that way, why Maleficent grows to love and care for Aurora in that film, whereas she always hates her in this one, because perhaps Aurora had the magical gift of happiness, meaning that she was able to make those around her and within the close proximity of her much more happy and content than they would have been otherwise, whereas Aurora in the animated film doesn't have the gift of happiness. She has the gift of song, meaning she can grant herself wishes using her song, whereas live-action Aurora, played by Elle Fanning, cannot do that, which is why she does not then call her prince to her using a song in her film. So I actually think that I've come up with a pretty good theory as to also, other than the King Stefan backstory, why those plots play out differently, because Aurora has a different gift and therefore different magical powers, because song and happiness are very different kinds of magic to use. That's the difference between the live action and animated Auroras. As touched upon in the production section of the introduction, the use of Tchaikovsky's at that point over 70-year-old Sleeping Beauty ballet as the score is one of the greatest decisions that Disney has ever made for one of their movies. The marriage between score and animation in this film is simply unrivaled by any other narrative picture in the canon. Really, only the two Fantasia films have a claim to being a better representation of the true power of music, and especially classical music and animation, to overwhelm the senses when paired together. Especially the moment where they are pursuing her when she is in the trance, just the music under that, just, it is so gorgeous, yet nerve-wracking, just stake-upping, just anxiety-inducing, just absolutely incredible score. It's so gorgeous. And when Maleficent is pursuing Phillip and the fairies, when she becomes a dragon, when they are running out of the castle, it's just so... the score to this film is something else. And it's kind of similar in a way to the way that they set Lady and the Tramp a few decades before they were making it, and so now we are watching that film a few decades back, and we have nostalgia for the era that they made the film in, and then they had nostalgia for the era in which that film was actually set, and then the makers of this film had nostalgia for, you know, the music of the past, or at least Walt did, and the time that perhaps the world that Tchaikovsky's Sleeping Beauty came from, and now we have nostalgia for the world that Sleeping Beauty 1959 came from, so I like that.
It's an example of, I mentioned this before, but it's an example of a studio and a leader in Walt understanding that they're building off of everything that they've made before, and it was just done in such an amazing way. And one of the things that I'd meant to say, just as I don't know if your fans know, but I obviously took classical music at University of British Columbia, and I'm a big opera, theater kind of ballet guy. And one of the things that also was very inspirational to this film was kind of the pre-Renaissance European art, and especially Tchaikovsky's 1889 ballet, the Sleeping Beauty. It had kind of that, the score had kind of a sense of hearkening back to kind of that pre-Renaissance kind of sense to it, and that's just so amazing to see in a Disney film. And I say that not to disparage Disney, but more to elevate it, to kind of go, this is what they were willing to kind of shoot for the stars for. Is they were like, look, we understand that these are movies that families go to, and it could be considered to be, again, that dreaded word, pretentious, or kind of hoity-toity, etc., but we're going to do it because we believe in our material. And nowadays, I think that, again, unfortunately, I think a lot of times, not just Disney, but a lot of companies now in the film world are kind of dumbing the audience down. They're treating the audience not really like idiots, but they're just treating the audience as if they're not able to kind of go on this journey with them, even if it's a little bit more mature and more, well, yeah, I guess I'll just say more mature than what has been in the past.
Less generic.
Yeah, exactly. Less generic than what it's been in the past. And so anyway, so for someone like myself, I loved the kind of the nods to Tchaikovsky's Sleeping Beauty ballet.
This is, to me, and to many others, the most beautiful traditionally animated film in the Disney canon. In fact, it's so effortlessly flowing and serene, as deep, rich, bold, and dark as the greatest medieval and Gothic illuminations, that it still has a terrific argument to this day as the best-looking Disney classic, period. The fluidity of the character movements and the smooth curves and sharp angles of their designs create a visual immersion unlike any other Disney narrative film has enjoyed. As mentioned in the intro, painter Eyvind Earle was responsible for much of the bold aesthetic of the film, especially the intricately painted backgrounds and bold usage of colors, as well as the illumination style of the background characters. I think these little artistic touches are some of the things that set the look of this movie apart the absolute most.
In searching for a style for a cartoon feature, many considerations are necessary. For one thing, it must be more than merely pleasing to the eye. The backgrounds must harmonize with the animated characters, as well as fit the mood of the story and the music. Sleeping Beauty is a fairy tale that is supposed to have taken place long, long ago. So we did a great amount of research into medieval painting and architecture before we arrived at the right styling for this picture.
The hundreds upon hundreds of extra hours and dollars Earl spent on this film are appreciated decades after for the dedicated and focused genius that they were, and I am glad he took the time. Yeah, I can just pause this movie on, Disney Plus or on DVD at any point and just gaze at the gorgeous painting that I've paused, because every frame is literally a painting. You just pause it and study these absolutely intricately woven, incredibly detailed, beautifully colored in backgrounds, and it's just,
it's beautiful!
Since Sleeping Beauty was photographed in anamorphic widescreen utilizing the 70mm film format, this meant that Earl and the rest of the animators were drawing and painting on pieces of paper as tall and wide as bed sheets. Walt described it as our most ambitious cartoon feature to date. As discussed in the intro, the failure of this film to be a hit financially was the reason Disney immediately stopped hand-inking their films and pivoted to the much less expensive xerography method of animation, starting with their next film, 1961's 101 Dalmatians. Again, as I said earlier, pioneered in the Hedges portion of this film. Opinions differ and mileage varies on how much people enjoy the look of xerography, as it has a looser, scratchier, and to some people a bit sloppier look than that of traditional hand-inked cell animation. However, one thing opinion does not differ on is just how utterly gorgeous every single frame of this film is, the pinnacle of Disney's traditional cell process. The backgrounds are paintings, layered and stretching far away from the viewer, deep into the horizon. The intricately wending lines of the trees, the bark, the leaves, the bushes, and the grass. Every stroke that these artists made was purposeful and caring. Every hand knowing that it was contributing to a masterpiece of the visual medium.
If you look at the old Master Van Eyck, you can see details on bushes miles away, as if everything in the whole picture is absolutely clear. And I haven't felt that way about this. It's a fairy tale. Let's make it like that. You'll notice that all the design in it is absolutely vertical or horizontal. Everything in it is based on these two juxtapositions, these two planes, including the characters.
I've gone in depth into the character designs of most of the main characters, but every human in this movie is striking and unique. King Stefan and King Hubert are marvelous contrasts with each other. One tall and slim, the other short and round, and the two often smacking up against each other like a stiff stick of celery and a squishy blood-red tomato. Aurora, as stated, is my pick for the prettiest princess design, and Maleficent is certainly a contender for most hauntingly but eerily beautiful villain design, too. Her long, slim fingers so unsettlingly elegant and refined, until she flies into a murderous rage. The genius Mr. Mark Davis was responsible for much of the design and animation of both Aurora and Maleficent, having previously been the mastermind behind Cinderella and Tinkerbell, among many others. Davis loved bringing both of these characters to life, working closely with Helene Stanley to create Aurora, as well as just as closely with Audley for Maleficent. Davis, in particular, credited Audley with the inspiration for many of Maleficent's particularly icy facial expressions. Davis made the edges of the evil fairy's cloak flare out like a flame and styled the spikes of her collar to resemble bat wings, as well as straight up giving her what he referred to himself as horns of the devil.
Oh, damn the devil! Damn the devil to hell! Oh, pursuit!
Veterans Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston collaborated on the Three Good Fairies together, with, again, as I said, Johnston being the advocator for their personalities. There was a running argument among the staff at Disney over what color Aurora's gown should be, becoming so legendarily divisive that the disagreement ended up in the plot of the film itself, in the form, of course, of Flora and Merryweather's magical color battle over the dress. However, despite these sorts of design wars being waged, Frank and Ollie collaborated beautifully to bring the actual three nice magical ladies themselves to life. Another interesting thing about Mark Davis with Aurora is that he had become at that time, with his work on Cinderella and Tinkerbell and other characters, known as the guy that they would always look to if they needed a pretty girl drawn and an attractive female character, and which is kind of why Maleficent herself ended up being so sexy in the end. But But never mind that now. But yeah, he was the guy that they wanted to do very pretty, elegant girls, and Disney himself challenged all of the animators to make this film look as realistic and lifelike as possible, which is why it has that sort of beautifully, perfectly, enchantingly rotoscoped feel, how everybody just sort of moves like a real person would move at the same pace that a real person would move. It just kind of has that almost uncanny but in a good way feel, especially to them dancing in the forest, stuff like that, when the characters just move normally as humans and not sort of flying fairies. It's an incredibly well realized film in terms of the fluidity of the movements, and Costa worked really closely with Mark Davis to come up with sort of the look of Aurora, and Walt Disney wanted Mary Costa to be as familiar with the character as possible and have a hand in her creation and just be sort of there from the very beginning in day one and really be innately, intimately connected with the character of Aurora. So the face and visual aesthetic of Aurora was based largely on Costa herself, and also combined with a lot of influence from Audrey Hepburn as well, who was just seen at that time as one of the most gorgeous, elegant women in the entire world, and still is, all time. And so Costa herself and Hepburn for the face of Aurora, and then Costa and Helene Stanley, of course, doing the body double work, so the two of them combining for the rest of the visuals. And then Costa's hand movements, even her habit of talking with her hands and even singing with her hands, was incorporated into the design for the character of Aurora as well, which is so cool. And Mary Costa and Mark Davis spent so much time together working on the character that they just ended up straight up becoming really good friends and really close during the making of the film, so I think that's lovely. Anyway, back to the fairies. The Three Good Fairies are to me a masterclass in simple visual design for a group of characters. It can be really difficult to make duos of characters stand out from each other, let alone a trio, both visually and personality-wise, rather than feeling like one collective character with three heads, but essentially one voice. The Three Good Fairies have totally distinct personalities, and so even if they all wore the exact same thing, they would all stick out differently in our mind. However, the animators went the extra mile with these three anyway. All three fairies wear essentially the same adorable little dress, whether it's their regular formal gown and hat look or their cottage matron outfit. However, Flora's red, Fauna's green, and Merryweather's blue are rich and lovely in their contrast to each other, so specific, highlighting the personality of each in different ways. Flora's red and Merryweather's blue make them feel a lot like fire and water whenever they are opposed, which is often with the placid Fauna caught in the middle, like Earth, dressed in her soothing, natural green. This element's symbology holds even more weight when you consider that Aurora, with her ethereal voice and youthful spirit, rounds out the four of them as their fourth element, air. As noted above, her purple eyes are a combination of two of their colors, and her blonde hair is the other primary color to red and blue. Again, rounding out Flora and Merryweather's colors in a different set of three. Purple and yellow are also opposite on the color wheel, making her hair and eyes perfectly complementary. Anyway, the fairy colors are bright and cheerful, they gloriously pop, and they differentiate from their other two sisters' looks immediately. The ladies also each sport a differently shaped clasp on their capes. Flora's a square, Fauna's a triangle, and Merryweather's a circle. They are then subtly different heights and shapes, with Flora being the tallest, Fauna being the slimmest, and Merryweather being the plumpest and shortest. This point about their colors leads me to the colors in the movie as a whole, which are utterly stunning in every shot. The murderous crimson of Maleficent's lips, the electric green of her magic, the deep dark blue of Aurora's hooded cloak, the gorgeously soft pink of her gown. All these hues serve to deepen and enrich the visual identity of this magnificent beast. I'm particularly in love with the colors picked in the designs of Aurora and Maleficent. While the fairies are incredible characters as visual icons, Aurora and Maleficent stand out in any crowd. Aurora's hair, highlighted in white against the gold, as I mentioned earlier, her violet eyes, her deeply red lips, as alluded to in the Gifts song, and the gorgeous pink and blue that her dress switches between. This is eye candy at its most sumptuous. Maleficent, for her part, has the most fascinatingly sickly green skin, beautiful yet unwell, repulsive yet compelling, repellent yet attractive nonetheless. Her pink lips, red nails, and most of all her cat-like yellow eyes serve to highlight this hypnotic palette. The deep purple of her robe, accented by her also purple eyeshadow, is a perfect pop of color against the pitch black that makes up the rest of her cloak and horns. There's even a tiny splash of pink at the bottom of her cloak when she throws her arms out wide, like when she freezes the king's guard in their tracks before yeeting herself from the christening. Color is affected by magic in this film, and is tied to it. When the fairies enchant the castle's inhabitants to fall asleep until Aurora awakes, the people put to sleep desaturate from their regular colors to a pleasantly calming green, blending in with the backgrounds behind them as they fall asleep, becoming part of the castle until they are awoken again. In direct contrast, as Phillip kisses Aurora to break the curse, life returns to the hues of the room, the sheets hanging around her bed turning gradually from a dark and gloomy blue to a rich, cheerful purple. My final example of this that I'll give is when Maleficent dies. After her dragon heart is pierced by the sword, she falls to her death, collapsing into a pile of rubble and smoke on the way down. But if you'll notice, the smoke is all made up of different shades of purple. Even in death, Maleficent's magic is still powerful enough to make the smoke billowing up from her dragon corpse an appropriately fabulous color. Her evil magic being purple and then Aurora's eyes being purple kind of reminds me of Harry's eyes being green in Harry Potter and the Avada Kedavra curse also being bright green. I want to briefly note and discuss the tapestry that we can see of three ladies in Aurora's room when she is hypnotized and taken away by Maleficent. This really closely to me resembles the three good fairies, and I think that this implies an adorable backstory where the king and queen, perhaps, thought that Aurora might like in her new bedroom in the castle a tapestry of the three ladies that raised her, and so put it in there, perhaps even without the three good fairies' knowledge, and just thought that it would be a cute gift for Aurora if she got homesick or missed the fairies. It's very, very sweet that they gave her a tapestry with three ladies watching over her, and I don't think that this is a coincidence because everything in this movie is extremely purposeful and all of the details are so specifically there. So I think that, her parents put a tapestry of her three fairy godmothers in her bedroom, and that's just so adorable. Like, aw. The animation of the magic in this film, especially in concert with the incredible feast of colors on display at their disposal to create said magic, is one of my favorite visual representations of this concept in popular culture. Maleficent's spontaneous entrances and exits are some of the most impressive flourishes, with her power so often being expressed through big shows of lightning and stuff like that, big forceful cracks and loud bangs, eventually appearing in front of the castle in a fit of emerald flames as if she were the goddamn Northern Lights.
Aurora Borealis!
As well as her magnificently extra transformation into a dragon. On the smaller scale, quite literally, the fairies using their powers to continually get smaller and smaller is adorable and incredibly well drawn. I love their little swish into it, it's so cute, little turn. Their creation of Aurora's crown together is also a gorgeous little moment.
And the thing I was going to mention, because I'd started with talking about the animation and how this was also the second animated film that was filmed in that anamorphic widescreen after their own Lady and the Tramp. And it's also amazing to see even how that kind of built off of Lady and the Tramp, meaning that Lady and the Tramp, which is another movie that's incredible, and you can feel kind of that distinction when it comes into the widescreen, like you can feel that. But this movie built off of it in such an incredible way because there was more use of it. The backdrops made much more sense because this is like kind of a fairy tale, whereas Lady and the Tramp was a much more grounded story, if that makes sense. I mean, obviously it was still fantastical in some ways, but this movie has such a kind of a glamorous, epic feel, and using that anamorphic widescreen was just amazing to see. And so, yeah, so again, just this feels like a feast for the eyes and the ears. I know that's a very kind of like, thing that everyone likes to say, but it really does feel like if the other movies before this, especially Cinderella and Snow White, if they were kind of the appetizers, it really does feel like Sleeping Beauty was the gourmet feast that Walt Disney was kind of waiting to make. And that, by the way, I guess we can now mention that ending sequence with Prince Phillip and Maleficent, her turning into the dragon, is like, I personally think that, I mean, the only thing, because I think I'd mentioned in the beginning that there's the two, climactic sequences, and one of them is obviously the Once Upon a Dream sequence, and then I would say this sequence at the end with Phillip and Maleficent is the other one, but I honestly do think that I don't really know of a more, climactic, epic sequence, at least until, the Renaissance. Like, maybe you could make an argument that from whatever, Little Mermaid on, that maybe there is some other sequences in there that could potentially rival Sleeping Beauty. I don't even know if I would agree with that, but you could make the argument. But at least from Snow White until 1989's Little Mermaid, I really don't think that you can possibly argue that that moment with Maleficent changing into the dragon and Phillip isn't the most, not just epic, but it is the most satisfying. It's the most fist pumping, that's what we were waiting for, and it was earned. It wasn't just basically okay, here's the big action sequence with a dragon and fire and etc. And it was done in such an artistic achievement way when it comes to the visuals. It was so striking, because even if it was a great sequence in regards to the character motivations and all that, if it wasn't able to be executed well enough in regards to the visual, it would still be lacking, because we've seen other movies in Disney's canons where maybe the idea is there, but the animation or kind of the stuff surrounding it isn't quite there enough to where it can really be pulled off 100%. This was not the opposite, but I guess in a way the opposite, in that not only were they able to pull off an amazing sequence because of the time that it built up to it and the character motivations and the story and all that, but they were also able to visually create it on screen in such a satisfying way that, it really is, I don't think, something that Disney basically has ever topped. I mean, I'm sure that if I thought about, again, kind of the Renaissance era, I might be able to come up with a couple, but it's incredible.
Hello again, I just wanted to pop in one more time.
Hi.
Saying that one detail that I had forgotten to mention about the art and the influences is that the production specifically took inspiration from the very famous unicorns tapestries that are, of course, so incredibly iconic and well known at this point. And they are an absolute marvel. I've had the privilege of seeing them in person myself once, I believe, and wow, what a sight to behold. And yeah, a lot of that beauty ended up on screen in this film, so there you go. Bye. The story is simple, even deceptively so at times, and the basic premise and setup is eerily similar to a future Disney classic, as I've hinted at. I will touch on that in just a few minutes.
But never mind that now.
Maleficent's motivation, being spite over not being invited to a christening, is maybe the most hilarious overreaction in Disney history. It works perfectly in a fairy tale and is also ludicrously funny, and contrasts as a perfect mirror to kindness and goodness being the defining trait of the three fairy protagonists, as well as Aurora herself. The pacing of this film is odd. Not bad, but definitely a little odd. The entire thing takes place over the course of 2 very key days. The opening scenes play out on the day and night of Aurora's christening, and then there is a time skip, and the rest of the film takes place entirely on Aurora's 16th birthday, from morning until after sunset. There really isn't much major action at all until the last 20 minutes, when Phillip is rescued by the fairies, and they team up to slap the shit out of a big purple dragon. Other than that thrilling ending, this movie is mostly concerned with young people wandering aimlessly through the woods singing, old ladies preparing a birthday celebration, and a very evil, very hot, very cranky woman learning that she can only really trust her pet raven in this world. If that sounds a little light story-wise, that's because it is, and that's a good thing, honestly. In this case, the writers and animators used this lack of a traditional narrative to really let us get to know these 8 key characters on a deeper level. There's Flora, the bossy, opinionated, but kind-hearted head of the fairies. Fauna, the agreeable ditz and peacemaker of the fairies. Merryweather, the bad-tempered, clever little sister of the fairies. There's King Stephen, tall, lean, and dignified, and his best friend King Hubert, short, fat, and pompous, the two always winding each other up. There's Phillip, the heroic first modern prince, decades ahead of his time. There's Aurora, a luminous and elusive supporting character with a voice fashioned by benevolent witchcraft. And finally, there is Maleficent, the queen bitch herself, the crown jewel in the stable of Disney villains created under the watchful eyes of Uncle Walt. These 8 characters, in my opinion, stack up favorably with the top 8 most important characters of pretty much any other Disney film. They're also marvelously different and varied and unique. None of them even remotely similar in design or voice or attitude. The story is as it is to allow these 8 fantastic characters to well and truly breathe. Another thing I see bandied about is that this film is not very progressive in a feminist way, and that Aurora specifically is a bit of a regressive princess, and it's just all about depending on a man, and depending on a man to save you, and just all about falling in love, only caring about falling in love, and that being your only ambition, and it just not being a very feminist film. And I think I'll get into this later, but to that I just call BS, because all of the 5 biggest characters in this film are all female. Phillip definitely comes 6th out of 6 in terms of most important. And yeah, they're all powerful women of different ages, especially the fairies. I'm going to get into it later, but this film is called not feminist by so many people, and it just is not true. It doesn't make any sense. It absolutely is quite a progressive feminist film that gives the women in the story a lot of power and a lot of agency. Women drive this film. This is a film about women and their emotions and their reactions to things, their cleverness, their plans, their fights. Like, this is a film about and driven by women. And I like that. And people retroactively saying it's not are just full of crap.
It's false.
One other silly thing I'll note is that this movie is, for some baffling reason, criticized by some modern viewers because, to quote them, Phillip didn't have Aurora's consent to kiss her. Well, to that ridiculous argument I say, does an EMT need consent to give someone life-saving mouth-to-mouth? Because this is essentially the magical equivalent of giving someone mouth-to-mouth. Aurora must be kissed by her true love to break the spell and wake her up so she can continue living her life. How is this any different than that? Therefore, Phillip did not require consent to administer True Love's kiss. It is inherent within True Love's kiss. Bad faith interpretations of classic and Renaissance Disney became incredibly common, popular, and annoying all throughout the 2000s and especially the 2010s, thanks in large part to idiotic publications like BuzzFeed and Cracked, and who knows who else. But I think that perhaps in this day and age, in, as the children say, big 2025, we can finally start to retire some of these ludicrous Phillip didn't have consent, Sleeping Beauty is anti-feminist, or Belle has Stockholm Syndrome, actually type arguments for good. However, even with a story as light as this, there is much that can be plumbed and discussed. This is a highly symbolic film, with each character representing a different ideal. Maleficent, pure evil and spite. Aurora, pure good and romantic love. Phillip, pure truth and virtue. Flora, confidence. Fauna, kindness. Merryweather, cleverness. All of these characters have well-defined personalities and qualities that are at once as complex and layered as they are simply drawn and easy to grasp. All these classic character types, the princess, the prince, the evil witch, the fairy godmother, the good king, the protective mother, the fire-breathing dragon, all of these enduring tropes are represented masterfully here together in a seamless tapestry of storytelling. As touched upon already in the fairies section, Aurora doesn't go on as much of a character arc as perhaps a modern protagonist usually would, although she does learn things throughout the film, but she is a bit of a constant, more so than some other title characters. But the good fairies do go on their own distinct character arc, having to let Aurora go. And again, the film's themes of motherhood and familial love and protectiveness is so sweet and lovely and wonderful and timeless. There is a great deal of biblical symbolism within. Looking at the film through a more religious lens, the fairies can be taken to represent angels, blessing the chosen child at birth. The child is then cursed at birth for the sins of her father, King Stephen not inviting Maleficent, and the sins of one of her mothers, Merryweather telling Maleficent she wasn't invited. She grows up marked for death, or at least a death-like sleep, and eventually calls to her the only one that can save her, her mortal hero, the prince. She is forsaken in her moment of vulnerability by her divine protectors and parents when she is left alone, and is vanquished temporarily by the devil, resisting but ultimately succumbing to a demonic representation of pure evil. However, the forces of good unite in the end, and the divine angels ultimately help the ordinary hero to believe in his ability to do the extraordinary. The prince vanquishes a fearsome beast imbued with all the powers of hell, and awakens with a kiss his bride, the divine one, who, like Christ, is now risen from her seeming death, as was foretold. Their union is one between Phillip, the mortal, and Aurora, the divine. Aurora, whose name means the dawn, the goddess of the morning, the golden-haired, magic-voiced, blessed holy child, the daughter of royalty and fairies, the girl with all the gifts. And that's why I think, as well, have such a focus on the princess films. Obviously, Disney as well does in their whole history, but it all goes back to Walt himself having a big focus on the princess films and his trilogy of them. These were very dear to his heart. Obviously, Snow White built the studio. Cinderella brought them back to box office and basically just brought them back to relevance, saved the studio, sort of set them back on the right track. And then Sleeping Beauty was the artistic culmination, and it made its money back many times over in the re-releases. It just was the first initial release that was unsuccessful, but it's not like it hasn't made a lot of money since, and that's why it's still an important part of the brand. As well as being amazing, it is actually a money-making franchise. It's just that it failed at the initial box office. But there's a reason. The the movie is still talked about, as well as the merit of it, is that it is a moneymaker. People love Maleficent, people love Aurora, people love the visual icons of this film, and like it does sell merch. But basically the three princess films, as you talk about as a trilogy, and like these three under Walt, like they are so important, they were so important to him. They have so much heart in them, they have so much care in them. These were the ones that they needed to get right. They were, at the times that they were made, 37, 50, 59, they are snapshots of their times and their productions in time, in history, in the 20th century, in Disney's history. They are just snapshots of what the company was trying to achieve at that time. With Snow White, it's a full-length cel-animated film that is lush and beautiful, and there's no dips in quality, and the story makes sense, and it's satisfying, and adults and especially children can enjoy it. It was all for children, but he wanted the adults to be able to get something out of it. And then Cinderella, it's, can we take that a step further? Can we make that bigger? Can we make it sillier and goofier and cuter and more fun? And can we just expand on that and make a new kind of princess film for the modern age? And then in Sleeping Beauty, it's, as you said, can we go full art house?
Yeah, no, exactly, 100%. And I think that is interesting that that this is another film, and obviously this wasn't the only film of Walt Disney's that the first release was a failure, really, you can say, in regards to the box office. But it is interesting that it failed the first time, and I do think, and again, this isn't to speak ill of the audience, but I do think that it was kind of the audience going like, oh, wait a minute, what is this? It was a lot more. Again, I was talking about how I think the pace of this movie and the editing is so good, but there's no question that this movie does also, I'll just say, take its time in telling its story, and certainly was a little bit more, that dreaded phrase, deliberately paced than other Disney films before. And so I think there was a sense in the beginning, clearly, that the audience was going like, well, wait a minute, I don't really know, what is this film? And it doesn't feel like the other movies. And I think Walt Disney and the animators and everyone was trying to say, yes, exactly, that's what we were going for. And it almost seemed like the audience kind of had to grow up and catch up to Walt's vision, if that makes sense. They kind of had to go, realize, oh, wait a minute, okay, this is what he was trying to do. And, so I think that it's great that now it actually is not just praised as an artistic achievement, but has made them a lot of money, because we know we've talked about other films, in whether it's Disney or even just in general, about films that never really end up making the studio money back. And while of course that's not the only reason, that's a big thing that allows other studios, other artistic people to be able to do what they do, is when studios see that people are interested in this story, they go, oh, we want to tell more stories like this. So even though it took some time, it took some catching up, we had to grow up along with Walt and the animators. It's great to see that it actually happened.
That discussion of story versus character weight and importance brings me neatly to my next area of praise, the dialogue. This has to be one of the funniest Disney movies ever, somewhere in the scrap for second place behind the legendary Emperor's New Groove. It isn't just funny, however. This can be a downright chilling film when you really listen to Maleficent's words, as I have talked about already, but they were able to achieve anything they wanted with the dialogue of this film. It's not hard to pick favorite lines from this script, as almost all of them are good choices. The dialogue is so perfectly in service of its characters. One of the best aspects of the writing in this film is how totally distinct all of the characters speak from one another. Let me give you some examples. Flora is condescending and blunt. When Merryweather tells her that her dress thus far looks awful, Flora replies, "That's because it's on you, dear."
It looks awful. That's because it's on you, dear.
Good God, Flora, you didn't have to murder the poor woman. Fauna is absent-minded and good-natured. When she is confused as to what a tisp is, phonetically sounding it out at first, she laughs heartily at herself when she realizes that it is short for teaspoon.
Oh, 1 teaspoon, of course.
Merryweather, as I talked about has my favorite line and favorite moment in the film when remarking that turning Maleficent into a fat old hop-toad would make herself happy, if accomplishing nothing else.
Well, that would make me happy.
I also really love the way that she says you weren't wanted and until Maleficent sends a frost, and just so many damn good lines. And it looks awful as well. That is such a funny one. Aurora's monologue to the creatures in the forest is sweet and sympathetic. Her description of her dream sweeping you up effortlessly in her feelings of longing.
Oh, a prince? Well, he's tall and handsome and so romantic. Oh, we walk together and talk together. Just before we say goodbye, he takes me in his arms, and then...
Her exchange with Phillip is also quite funny at times. When she's rushing back to the cottage, Phillip asks when he'll see her again. She replies, "Oh, never." He asks, "Never?" She replies, "Well, maybe someday." He asks, "When? Tomorrow?" She immediately comes back with, "No, this evening." She went from never to someday to later today, all in about 10 seconds, and I am absolutely here for it. Impulsivity. She obviously wanted to see him immediately again and introduce him to her 3 aunts, and she just blurted out "never" by mistake the first time he asked. I don't know why I find that so adorable, but I just do. Philip's best line is probably to his father, when King Hubert insists that Philip is a prince and must marry a princess. Philip replies, "Now, father, you're living in the past. This is the 14th century." Perfection.
Now, Father, you're living in the past. This is the 14th century.
Maleficent, for her part, has more sarcastic and cutting lines of dialogue than I can even count, so I'll just list my top couple. I love her opening comment on who is present at the christening, describing the crowd before alluding to her fellow fairies by saying that King Stephen has invited royalty, nobility, the gentry, and how quaint, even the rabble. Maybe my favorite line of hers is when she silences the court before casting her curse, proclaiming simply, "Listen well, all of you," and slamming the end of her staff down on the floor with an ear-splitting crack. Just chills every time.
I have full body chills right now.
By the way, the sound of Maleficent's staff, as well as the sound of her dragon form's jaws snapping, was created with the use of ebony castanets. Her curse on Princess Aurora itself is a great piece of dialogue writing. Audley's delivery of the word "die" to end it, and her subsequent mad, evil cackle are both pants-crappingly scary.
She shall prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and die.
Her entire speech to Philip, as I have gone over a couple of times, is simply the writers going way harder on the psychological torment than they really needed to, and I love it. The baddest damn throwdown line in all of Disney history, however, has to be Maleficent appearing out of nowhere in front of Prince Philip in green flames and screaming in his face, "Now shall you deal with me, O Prince, and all the powers of hell." And now, before we hear what all the other critics had to say briefly, it's time for a little smoke break.
More refreshing to begin with, more refreshing all the way.
And now it's time for the Critics Roundup, which is the section of these videos where I take a little bit of time and read some thoughts from usually 20-something other critics. I tell you where they ranked the film in their rank of the Disney films, and I give you their very brief thoughts on them, and that way we gain sort of an understanding of what the general consensus on the film is, at the very least, of people who've ranked them online. And the reason I explain it so specifically and fully in this video is, for one, a lot of you will be watching this as your first D.E.A.R, and for another, that this is the script in my writing process in which the Critics Roundup originated. And it was because I kept seeing reviewers and rankers talk about the 3 good fairies as side characters, and I kept seeing them refer to Sleeping Beauty as a weak lead character, as a weak protagonist. So that's another reason why I have harped on Aurora being a side character, supporting character so much, and the three good fairies being the protagonists and leads so often during this review is because so many people, when talking about this film online, especially in reviewers, still say that, and they're just wrong, and they just parrot this opinion about the film that is just objectively untrue.
It's totally made up. Pure fiction. It's fiction.
And so, weak lead character is just something that is said about Aurora over and over again, and the fairies are talked about as comic relief side characters usually. Sometimes people do, again, as I said earlier, sometimes they do recognize it, as I'll get into with this Critics Roundup here. But yeah, this was the script because I kept seeing, I was watching ranks just for fun, and then I kept hearing Sleeping Beauty talked about in this very specific way, in this way that does not really truthfully represent it and the reality of the story of it. And so I just wanted to come up with a category where we sort of showed the consensus on all of these films and the things that are usually said about these films by the people who discuss all of the films together. And if there are any common things that are often said, what the consensuses are, what the divisive things are, and of course if there's any misconceptions that are commonly parroted, as we are talking about today. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Sean Chandler, 12th, talked about Aurora being a boring protagonist and mislabeled the fairies as supporting characters, praises the animation and music, and Maleficent. L.S. Mark, 14th, did exactly the same thing, basically word for word. Shea Frillis Productions, 25th, correctly identified that the fairies are the main characters, but still complains about Aurora being somehow boring. Well, you can't win them all. Brian Hull, 44th, talked about low stakes. The Trove, 7th, cites pacing issues and doesn't refer to the fairies as the leads, praises the animation, music, and Maleficent, loves the fairies, says it's the pinnacle of classic Disney. Dave Lee Down Under, 7th, only discusses music and animation, calls it classic and euphoric and a visual masterpiece and Walt's masterpiece. Modern Mouse, 12th, only mentions the art, calls it A tier. The 90s Kid, 1st to 8th, mostly talks about the art, doesn't mention the three good fairies. Justin watches movies. 8th, praises the animation, music, Maleficent, praises Aurora as a great and iconic character, and mentions the good fairies as providing lighter moments, but not as the leads. Jello Apocalypse, 25th to 35th. The Glad in Gladiator, 25th, talked about Maleficent, the art, the fairies, Phillip, said Aurora was a bad character. Chris Itua, 19th, talked about Maleficent, art, and other charming elements, criticized Aurora for not having character development, didn't mention the three good fairies. Maple Street Movies, 20th, calls it great. The Movie Geek, 35th, complains that Aurora is barely in the movie, says he likes the end sequence. Questy, 26th. Alright, well that was all of the YouTube ranks, and now it's time for the online critics. Collider, 2nd, praised every aspect, especially the art and including the storytelling. However, never mentions the good fairies at all, and characterizes it as a film where the lead character falls into a coma for much of the movie. Much of the movie. Paste Magazine, 4th, praises the animation and Maleficent, but says it lacks narrative punch. Doesn't mention the good fairies. Slash Film, 4th, praises the animation and Maleficent, but complains about not having the tightest story. Doesn't mention the good fairies. Yes, just a big theme here, basically the exact same. 2 in a row there that gave it a 4th placement and almost an identical review, so very interesting. Just don't even talk about the lead characters of the movie. We Love Cinema, 16th, praises the animation and Aurora's aesthetic, criticizes the fact that she goes to sleep, doesn't mention the fairies or Maleficent at all. It's like people don't even like the narrative hook of this film that she does eventually go to sleep. People just simply seem to dislike that element of the story for some reason, even though it's kind of essential to the whole plot. It's very strange. I don't get it. Hollywood.com. 21st, calls the fairies comedically bumbling, praises Maleficent and the animation. Screen Rant. 37th, says that while it is the weakest to them of the original princess movies, Maleficent and the Tchaikovsky score make it unforgettable. My SF Reviews. 3rd, only discusses and extensively praises the animation. Metacritic. 10th, only discusses the production. BuzzFeed. 33rd, praises the animation, criticizes the story pacing and Aurora's character, doesn't mention the good fairies. Cinema Blend. 3rd, praises Aurora, Phillip, and Maleficent's characters, doesn't mention the good fairies. Are you seeing the pattern here? I wonder, perhaps. The Playlist. 18th, praises the animation, calls Aurora and Phillip a boring hero and heroine, doesn't mention the good fairies at all. Unshaved Mouse. 11th, only discusses the animation. Screen Saved. 4th, praises the animation, criticizes the story and character work. Noah Fryman. 6th, praises the animation and Maleficent, but doesn't mention anything else. Darth Docking on Reddit. 12th. What Culture. 20th, praises the animation, Maleficent, and characters in general, mentions the fairies but only as support, and describes Aurora as a boring and vanilla main character. Rolling Stone. 14th, says that it is unquestionably the most beautiful-looking Disney movie. Of those that even mentioned the 3 good fairies specifically, only one single solitary other reviewer and ranker out of these 32, Shea Frillis Productions, correctly identified them as the leads of the movie in their review, and 8 other reviewers refer to them specifically as supporting characters, if they are mentioned at all. I've gone over it, I know, a billion times in this video, but that's because I want to hammer it home that this is not true about the film. And hammer home what is true. 32 rankings with an average rank of exactly 16th, 16.0, a lowest ranking of 44th, and a highest ranking of joint first, or a highest solo ranking of second. It was in 12 of 32 rankers' top 10s, and in 0 rankers' bottom 10. In addition, it appeared in 28 out of the 32 rankers' top half, and 31 of 32 ranked it no lower than 37th. That 44th was quite the outlier from Brian Hull. As you can see, it's in second place so far in our big running average rank from the critics' roundup. It's, yes, second place overall. Pinocchio was a little bit over 16th on average, and out of the 16 films so far up through 1959, it's number 2 only behind Snow White. So that's pretty interesting. Even though Pinocchio had multiple first placements in its critics roundup, it still has a slightly lower average ranking than Sleeping Beauty did among its critics roundup. So yeah, doing well. Second so far in the running.
We will watch your career with great interest.
Just to wrap up, I'll just say that, yeah, I think the thing that makes this film very special for both of us, but I'll just speak for myself, is A, the timelessness of this film, and this story feels especially just like pristine, and just even more so due to the fact of, again, yes, there's a sense of the age-old themes and the simplicity of the themes of heroism and motherhood and, bitterness versus love and et cetera, et cetera. Also, again, it was 100% the culmination of the artistic accomplishments that Walt Disney and his team were able to accomplish up until that point. And I think also number 3, and this is a big one for me as a musician, is that it was the culmination, I think, of the complexity of the music. And again, that's not to disparage the other movies as being simple, but there's a complexity to the score, there's a complexity to Once Upon a Dream that just feels even more mature than the other ones did. And so I think that yeah, it's a film that definitely is very, very special, and I'm happy, very, very happy that finally it seems like it's kind of getting its due, and people are more and more starting to realize the genius of it, because it really, really is.
Absolutely. Well, even though it's perhaps not much of a mystery after we've sung its praises for an hour straight, let us perhaps give it our... You can give it your rating out of 10. I'll stick this at the end of the video, and it'll be mixed in right alongside mine. But your rating out of 10, and if you want it, you don't have to give us your exact placement, or rating out of 100 because you do that, and you don't have to give us your exact placement, but just sort of the general area that you rank it on your ranking list.
Yeah, so I'll just say I give it, out of, you go to 10, it would be a 10 out of 10, or on my scale a 100 out of 100, absolutely. And I'll say that it's I'm gonna leave the exact thing, because I kind of would like to, I think at the end of when you've like done all of your D.E.A.Rs, I'd like to kind of then maybe like publish my list like on like the comments or something on one of yours. So I'll just say it's in my top 10. I'll just say it's in my top 10. And it's high on my top 10, if I can even give more of a hint. But yeah, it's incredible. There's not really much that I think could be improved on it. I will say that I guess I'll just spoil and say it's not at the very, very top of my list, but that's primarily because there's some films that either maybe hold a special place in my heart more for when I saw it, or like I said before, I think that Sleeping Beauty has the heart there, but it's maybe not quite as emotionally resonant as other certain films that they've done. But in regards to the technical achievement, this is basically the crown jewel of Walt Disney's catalog, I think. It was great to be on again with you guys again. I think I've been dubbing since the beginning. I've been dubbing your fans the Museonites, I've been saying, you know. I don't know if it's ever going to catch on, but that's what I'm saying. So yes, it was great to be with you guys again, and yeah, I look forward to chatting some more in the future.
As alluded to earlier when I mentioned how similar this film is in setup to another Disney classic, let us now analyze all the similarities between this film and Tangled. Tangled bears many resemblances to Sleeping Beauty and is indebted to its influence beyond measure. Indeed, Tangled can be seen as at the very least a knowing instance of taking a previous film and somewhat flipping that concept around on us, focusing on different lead characters but in a similar story setup. Basically, Tangled is like if Aurora actually was the main character instead of the fairies. Both films open with a male narrator detailing the birth of a baby given magical powers. She is born to a beautiful queen and a tall king with a dark Van Dyke-style beard. In both, an older woman appears who is a powerful magic user and becomes our obvious villain. In both films, a princess is taken immediately after her birth and hidden away in the forest to be raised by an alternative maternal figure, or figures. In Sleeping Beauty, Aurora is taken by the three good fairies out of love and protection to act as her guardians. In Tangled, Mother Gothel steals Rapunzel out of greed and selfishness, acting as her jailer. Both princesses are introduced anew as adults after a 16/18-year time skip by emerging into the sunlight through an open window and then singing. Aurora briefly and Rapunzel in a full number. Both Aurora and Rapunzel are bright, energetic, beautiful, charming young women with long blonde hair and magical powers involving their hair and voices. Both are utter dreamers and optimists. Both of their plots revolve around their birthday, 1/16 and 1/18, the major turning point in each of their lives. Both of them are at one point locked away in a tall tower.
He climbs to the highest bloody room of the tallest bloody tower.
Both wander around the woods barefoot, wearing a dress with a string bodice or corset on the outer layer. Both meet a handsome love interest with an unusually expressive horse companion. They each have a solo song they wistfully perform, as well as a love duet that they share with their own respective dashing male companion. Side note, but the voice, or really horse noises, of Samson the horse was provided by the greatest voice actor of all time himself, Mel Blanc.
Come on, let's find out. Oh, come on.
Yes, the legendary Mel Blanc did the horsey noises for Samson, as well as the hiccups for Gideon the cat in Pinocchio. Gideon was originally going to have dialogue, and then they cut all the dialogue, even though they cast Mel freaking Blanc. But whatever, he gets to be a horse here. So, huzzah. Speaking of horses, I know full well that this has been a horse of a review, but there are just a few key points I want to very briefly repeat and that I want you to leave this essay with. Aurora has always been unfairly criticized for being a weak protagonist when she was never one in the first place. The three good fairies are not given their due because of several factors, including possibly bias against older female lead characters. Yes, I didn't really want to get that much into that, I guess, just because it's, it's just kind of like more railing and complaining against bias and prejudice, and there's already enough of that in this video. But the good fairies being sort of grandmother figures and magically being cut out and de-emphasized as the main characters of the film by sort of modern Disney and modern audiences is so typical and just so sad, and it's so amazing that Disney chose to tell this story with these older female protagonists and these grandmother figures and maternal figures, and it's so sad that they now choose to de-emphasize those incredible protagonists that they did create all the way back in the late 1950s. How progressive in a great, wonderful, celebratory way. This movie is also attacked for being non-feminist while being the only Disney animation film where the 5 most important characters are all female, and they drive the entire plot. This movie is the most female-focused and driven of the entire canon, and one of the most perfect distillations of the princess formula, along with, for reasons now obvious, Tangled. Another last thing I'll note is that I adore the themes of circular magic and romantic love conquering all here, contrasted with the negative power of scorn and hurt feelings marring the world in the beginning, to be followed by the magic of romantic love mending it in the end, fostered by the parental love of the 3 good fairies who make up for their initial mistake of rudeness by raising a magical miracle of their own in recompense, their marvelous briar rose. Let my final words today be these. This film is a work of art so utterly phenomenal that mere words seem insufficient to describe just what and how much it means to me. Sitting down to watch this story unfold once more feels to me each time like entering another dimension, stepping out of this fraught, troubled, terribly treacherous real-life existence and into a world of gorgeous sound, towering fury, brilliant color, spectacular bravery, and pure, deep, timeless, true love. It is a gleaming, towering, everlasting monument to everything that animated storytelling ever has been and ever will be. And, simply put, it is a masterpiece. 10 out of 10. And that's it. Next week, we'll be back with another silly video, I'm sure, before eventually the next D.E.A.R in 1961's 101 Dalmatians, so please do join me for all of those as well. Thank you ever so much for watching, and if you're still here, good night, good luck, and enjoy the afterword.
That doll